My mother-in-law tapped her heavy silver knife against the rim of her crystal wine glass. The sharp ping cut right through the low murmur of the dining room at the country club. She smoothed her silk napkin over her lap, looked right past my face, and announced to the table that she had just canceled my son's birthday party. The reservation at the Glasshouse Estate was for a Saturday night. It was a prime weekend slot I had secured 8 months in advance with a $25,000 deposit for Leo's 4th birthday. She told everyone she had called the venue that morning and moved my son's party to a Tuesday afternoon. She needed the Saturday slot for her own 40th wedding anniversary. "He is 4. He will not remember a thing," Evelyn said, taking a slow sip of her Cabernet. "Richard and I need the weekend date for our investors. Family supports family, Victoria." She thought that was the end of the discussion. She had no idea that I build hospitality risk profiles for a living, or what happens when you try to steal from a woman who audits luxury contracts in her sleep. Welcome to Morning Revenge, where the quiet daughters-in-law finally stop apologizing and start keeping receipts. Drop your age in the comments, tell me where you are listening from, and be sure to subscribe. My name is Victoria Frank. I am 30 years old, and I evaluate financial liability for high-end estates in New York. Across the table with the white linen tablecloth, my husband David did not say a word to defend our son. He stared down at his phone screen, his thumb hovering over the glass, without pressing anything. The silence from his side of the table was a physical weight pressing against my chest. The scent of Evelyn's heavy floral perfume, mixed with the roasted duck on our plates, suddenly making my stomach turn. Evelyn, taking what belonged to me, was just her nature, but David letting her do it was a choice. The venue manager was very accommodating once I explained who we were. Evelyn continued setting her glass down on the coaster. "They will handle the vendor transfers. You can just leave your card on file for the incidentals." She wanted me to scream. She wanted a scene right there in front of the other country club members so she could paint me as the hysterical, ungrateful outsider who did not understand how high society operated on Long Island. My chest went tight. The urge to flip the table was a hot flash in my blood. But the anger burned out fast, leaving behind a glacial, razor-sharp calm. You do not survive in risk management by throwing tantrums. You survive by reading the fine print. "Tuesday afternoon," I repeated. My voice stayed perfectly level. I picked up my water glass and took a slow drink. The ice was cold against my teeth. "That is quite a scheduling shift, Evelyn." David finally looked up from his glowing screen. His jaw flexed. "It makes sense, Victoria. My parents have a lot riding on this anniversary gala. The networking alone is crucial right now. We owe them this much for the country club membership anyway." He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. His palm felt clammy. He squeezed my fingers, silently ordering me to play along and keep my mouth shut. I looked down at his hand. Then I looked at Evelyn, who was watching me with a smug, victorious tilt to her chin. She assumed my $25,000 deposit was now funding her vanity project. She assumed she held the upper hand. I smiled. Just a small, polite curve of the lips. "I understand," I said, sliding my hand out from under his grip. "I will let you handle the details with the venue then." Evelyn beamed, thrilled by my apparent submission. What she did not know was that 24 hours prior, I had noticed an irregularity in the venue's client portal. Before arriving at this dinner, I had personally called the general manager of the Glasshouse Estate, a man whose annual compliance rating depends entirely on my corporate audit reports. I had already authorized the transfer of my original deposit into a secure corporate escrow account that only I could access. The Saturday night date currently sitting under Evelyn's name was holding a zero balance. She had just hijacked an empty reservation. And the hospitality traps I had armed waiting for her were going to cost her a lot more than a weekend party. The waiters in crisp white uniforms stepped silently around the dining table, their practiced hands clearing the remnants of the roasted duck. Heavy silver cutlery clinked softly against fine bone china. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, holding court. She regaled the neighboring table with grand tales of her upcoming 40th anniversary gala, pitching her voice loud enough to ensure every wealthy patron in the dining room heard the venue name. David kept his eyes fixed on his empty dessert plate. He did not look at me. He did not say a single word about his mother hijacking his own son's birthday. His cowardice sat in the empty space between us, heavy and suffocating. I placed my linen napkin on the table and stood up. I offered a tight, polite smile to the surrounding relatives, murmuring an excuse about needing some fresh air. I walked away from the table, my heels sinking slightly into the plush carpet of the country club dining room. The air conditioning inside the main hall was freezing, carrying the faint scent of expensive cigars and aged bourbon. I pushed open the heavy oak doors leading to the outdoor terrace. The humid Hudson Valley night air wrapped around my shoulders instantly. Maya was already out there. She stood by the stone balustrade, her tailored navy suit cutting a sharp silhouette against the garden lights. Maya was married to David's older brother, Thomas. In the toxic hierarchy of the Frank family, Thomas was the undisputed golden child. He was a prominent neurosurgeon who had graduated top of his class from a medical school in Boston. Evelyn and Richard practically worshipped his medical degree. They routinely paid for his business class flights and treated him to Michelin-star dinners, parading him around the country club like a prized show pony. Maya, on the other hand, held a prestigious law degree and operated as a senior corporate partner at a ruthless Manhattan firm. She handled complex estate planning for billionaires. Yet beneath this sophisticated veneer, Evelyn treated her daughter-in-law's elite legal mind like a trivial afterthought. Evelyn frequently asked Maya to coordinate family calendars or pick up dry cleaning, reducing a brilliant attorney to the role of a personal assistant. Maya understood the exact flavor of this family's poison. She survived by staying quiet, watching every move and gathering leverage. As I approached the stone railing, Maya did not turn her head. She kept her gaze fixed on the rolling green hills of the golf course. She took a slow sip of her sparkling water. The ice clinked gently against the glass. "You handled that well in there," Maya said, her tone smooth and measured. Most women would have thrown their wine in her face. "I survived my 20s by learning not to react to emotional terrorism," I replied, stepping up beside her. The night air was thick, but my hands were still cold. "Evelyn thinks she won a free venue. She thinks I am going to let her steal a $25,000 deposit." Maya turned to face me. The garden lights caught the sharp, calculating gleam in her eyes. She reached into the pocket of her tailored blazer and pulled out a crumpled piece of thermal paper. She smoothed it out flat against the cold stone of the balustrade and slid it toward me. "Notice whose name is not on the tab," Maya murmured, her manicured finger tapping the bottom of the receipt. I looked down. It was the preliminary dinner bill for our table. The total was exorbitant, covering multiple bottles of vintage wine and premium entrees. But the member's signature at the bottom did not belong to Richard Frank. The name printed in bold black ink was Thomas. "Richard is supposed to cover the family dinners," I said, my brow furrowing as I read the numbers. "He always makes a grand show of handing his black card to the maitre d'." "His black card was declined last Tuesday," Maya stated quietly. Her voice barely rose above a whisper, ensuring the words did not carry past the stone railing. "The country club suspended his primary charging privileges 3 days ago. Richard begged Thomas to put his credit card on file just to get through tonight without causing a public scene." I stared at the receipt. The gears in my mind, honed by years of analyzing hospitality risk, began to turn rapidly. The Frank family projected an image of untouchable generational wealth. Richard owned a regional real estate development firm, and Evelyn spent her days lunching with socialites. But a suspended club membership meant a severe lack of liquid cash. Richard is hemorrhaging money. Maya continued, folding the receipt and slipping it back into her pocket. "His commercial real estate portfolio is underwater. He over-leveraged 3 suburban strip malls right before the interest rates spiked. The business is borderline insolvent." The pieces clicked together, forming a bleak, jagged picture. "The 40th anniversary party is not a celebration," I said, the realization washing over me like cold water. It is a desperate public relations stunt, Maya confirmed. They need that Saturday night slot at the Glasshouse estate to fake a display of ultimate prosperity. Richard is trying to court a private equity group to bail out his firm. If those investors suspect the Franks are broke, they will walk away, and the creditors will seize the house. Evelyn could not book a premium venue on her own because they require a 50% deposit up front. She stole your date because she assumes your money is already locked in. I leaned against the stone railing. Evelyn was not just being petty. She was using my son's birthday fund as a life raft for her husband's sinking empire. But there is a second layer to this, Maya warned, her tone growing sharper. You need to watch your back, Victoria. Evelyn is not just borrowing your venue, she is actively trying to push you out of the picture. I frowned, looking at my sister-in-law. Why would she want me out? I am the one with the stable income. That is exactly the problem, Maya explained. You have independent wealth. You have a high-paying career that they cannot control. In this competitive, status-driven culture, Evelyn views your independent investments as shared family property. She thinks David is entitled to every dollar you earn. Evelyn wants to break your confidence, isolate you, and force you to submit to their hierarchy. She believes if she humiliates you enough, you will hand over control of your finances to David, just to keep the peace. A cold shiver ran down my spine, entirely unrelated to the night air. The in-laws felt entitled to my bank accounts. They wanted to hijack my assets to cover their own failures. Maya took another sip of her water. I audit corporate decay for a living, Victoria. When a company is failing, the executives start raiding the pension funds. Watch your own house. If Richard is going under, David might be feeling the pressure to help him. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. David. My husband had sat at that dinner table in complete silence, allowing his mother to steal our venue without a single word of protest. He had squeezed my hand, demanding compliance. If his parents were secretly broke and David knew about it, his recent behavior suddenly looked far more sinister than simple cowardice. For the past 3 months, David had been highly secretive about his laptop. He had changed the passcode on his phone. He had brushed off my questions about our joint savings, claiming he was diversifying our portfolio with alternative investments. My breath caught in my throat. I had dismissed his odd behavior as stress from his mid-level management job. I had trusted him. But as a risk analyst, I knew the golden rule of fraud detection. The betrayal always comes from inside the house. I need to go, I told Maya, stepping away from the balustrade. My heart hammered a steady, relentless rhythm against my ribs. Check your blind spots, Maya advised softly, turning her gaze back to the golf course. They think they own you. Show them what an auditor actually does. I walked back through the heavy oak doors, ignoring the chatter of the dining room. I did not return to the table. I walked straight out the front doors of the country club, handed my ticket to the valet, and waited for my car. Evelyn wanted a war for status. She was about to get a master class in financial ruin. But before I dealt with her, I had to open my personal laptop in the dead of night and run a forensic trace on the man sleeping in my bed. The drive back from the country club was a masterclass in unspoken tension. David kept both hands on the leather steering wheel, his eyes locked on the dark stretch of highway. The dashboard lights cast a pale glow over his face, illuminating the tight line of his jaw. He did not offer a single apology for his mother. He did not mention Leo. When we pulled into the driveway of our colonial home, he turned the engine off, grabbed his suit jacket, and walked inside without waiting for me. By the time I locked the front door, he was already in the master bedroom, shedding his clothes and retreating into sleep. He wanted to skip the argument. He believed if he closed his eyes, my compliance would simply become a settled fact by morning. I did not follow him to bed. I walked into the kitchen and turned on the small pendant light above the marble island. The house was dead quiet. The only sound was the low, steady hum of the refrigerator. Maya had warned me to check my blind spots. Her words echoed in the silent room. I opened my leather briefcase, pulled out my work laptop, and set it on the cold stone counter. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. For a fleeting second, a wave of hesitation washed over me. Once you pull the thread on a suspicion, the fabric of your life unravels, and you can never stitch it back together. I pushed the hesitation down, took a slow breath, and opened the screen. The bright blue light stung my tired eyes. I bypassed the standard family budgeting spreadsheet we shared. Instead, I booted up the proprietary risk assessment software I utilized for auditing luxury hospitality groups. It was a rigorous program designed to detect phantom vendors' hidden liabilities and offshore diversions. I synced the software to our joint banking accounts, entering the administrative credentials I had set up years ago. The progress bar crawled across the screen, parsing through 12 months of our financial history. I walked over to the coffee maker, poured a lukewarm cup from that morning, and took a bitter sip. When I returned to the island, the screen had refreshed. A glaring row of red text illuminated the monitor. My stomach plummeted. The software had flagged an $18,000 discrepancy. The system categorized the missing funds as anomalous extractions. My hands began to tremble. I set the coffee mug down so hard the ceramic clanked against the marble. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles turning white, staring at the numbers. David had labeled the ongoing withdrawals as crypto investments. Over the past 7 months, he had manually transferred sums ranging from $500 to $2,000 into an external account, tagging them under a digital currency portfolio he claimed would secure our early retirement. He had bragged about these investments during neighborhood barbecues, positioning himself as a savvy financial visionary. I clicked on the routing number of the external destination. It did not trace back to a blockchain exchange. My software bypassed the dummy tags and pulled the raw banking data. The transfers were feeding directly into a secondary checking account at a local credit union, an account solely in his name. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that made it hard to breathe. I ran a forced reconciliation protocol, pulling the transaction history of that hidden credit union account. The ledger populated on my screen, line by agonizing line. There were no digital coins. There were no stock purchases. Instead, I saw a $1,200 charge at a boutique hotel in Manhattan, dated on a Friday night when David claimed he was trapped at the office running quarterly reports. I saw a $400 dinner receipt from a Michelin-starred seafood restaurant. I saw regular recurring charges at a luxury lingerie retailer, a premium day spa in the Hamptons, and a high-end jeweler. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt too thin to inhale. The betrayal was not a vague concept. It was documented in relentless, undeniable arithmetic. He was not investing in our future. He was funding a mistress. The physical reaction hit me like a sudden illness. A sharp ache bloomed behind my sternum. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, blurring the damning numbers on the screen. I pressed the heel of my hand against my mouth to stifle a sob. The man sleeping down the hall, the man who kissed my forehead every morning and played with our son on the living room rug, was a meticulously constructed illusion. I turned away from the screen and walked down the dark hallway. I stood in the doorway of the master bedroom. David was sprawled across the mattress, his chest rising and falling in a deep, untroubled rhythm. He looked peaceful. He looked innocent. The pieces of the evening slammed into place, shifting the entire landscape of my marriage. David always prided himself on projecting the image of a wealthy patriarch. When we first met, he frequently reminded me of his elite pedigree, subtly dismissing my modest upbringing. He needed the world to view him as a titan, but the ledger proved he was drowning. His entry-level executive salary could not sustain a mortgage, a country club membership, and an expensive secret affair. He was broke. And because he was broke, he was entirely dependent on his parents. Richard and Evelyn held the promise of a multi-million-dollar inheritance over his head. That was the invisible leash. David allowed his mother to hijack Leo's birthday venue because he could not afford to defy her. If he stood up to Evelyn, she would cut off his financial safety net, and his fraudulent double life would instantly collapse. He sold out his own 4-year-old son to keep his mistress in luxury hotels. Standing in the shadows of the bedroom doorway, the overwhelming grief began to recede. The hot, suffocating pain drained away, replaced by a freezing, mechanical clarity. The tears dried on my cheeks. I turned my back on the sleeping stranger and returned to the kitchen island. I sat down on the bar stool and dragged the cursor across the screen. I was no longer a heartbroken wife. I was a senior risk analyst, and my subject had just failed a major compliance audit. I opened a secure, encrypted drive on my desktop. I began taking meticulous screenshots of every fraudulent transfer. I downloaded the bank statements, the hidden credit union ledgers, and the time-stamped hotel receipts. I cross-referenced his calendar alerts with the credit card charges, building an airtight timeline of his infidelity. I organized the files into neat, undeniable categories: embezzlement, marital waste, financial infidelity. I worked for 3 hours in total silence. The repetitive click of the mouse and the soft tapping of the keyboard were the only sounds in the house. I calculated the exact percentage of the joint savings he had drained. I drafted a preliminary asset division matrix ensuring every dollar he siphoned would be deducted from his future equity in a divorce settlement. I was building a checkmate that would leave him financially destitute, trapped in the very poverty he had spent his life mocking. By the time I finished compiling the dossier, the sky outside the kitchen window had begun to turn a bruised, pale purple. Dawn was breaking over Long Island. I safely ejected the encrypted drive and slipped it into the hidden lining of my briefcase. I closed the auditing software and cleared the browser history. As I shut the laptop lid, a soft chime broke the quiet of the kitchen. It came from David's tablet, which was resting on the charging dock near the espresso machine. The screen lit up with a fresh notification. I walked over and glanced at the glowing display. It was an email forwarded from Evelyn's personal assistant, marked with high urgency. I read the preview text hovering on the lock screen. Evelyn was demanding that David supply the contact information for my premium caterer and the luxury florist. Since she had assumed control of the venue date, she now believed she was entitled to hijack my elite vendors for her anniversary gala. A slow, dangerous smile crept across my face. Evelyn wanted the premium vendors. She wanted to play the role of the Grand Society hostess, using my meticulously curated contacts. She did not realize those exclusive vendors only answered to one corporate management group in the Hudson Valley: mine. The trap was armed. The next phase of the audit was about to begin, and the in-laws were walking right into the snare. The morning sun crested the horizon, casting pale yellow rays across the granite countertops of my kitchen. I had not slept a single minute. Instead, I stood by the stainless steel sink, letting the cold tap water run over my wrists to ground myself. My pulse beat a steady, rhythmic thrum against my skin. The encrypted drive was tucked safely inside the hidden compartment of my leather work bag. David's financial ruin was secured in a pristine zip file. Now it was time to address his mother. I dried my hands with a linen towel and opened my corporate smartphone. The screen displayed my professional auditing dashboard. As a senior hospitality risk analyst, I dictated the financial safety protocols for every premier event space in the Hudson Valley. Elite caterers, high-end florists, and bespoke decorators relied on my compliance ratings to determine which clients were safe to invoice and which required stringent upfront guarantees. Evelyn assumed that hijacking the Glasshouse estate meant she automatically inherited my prearranged vendor contracts. She believed my $25,000 deposit would seamlessly cover her champagne towers, imported caviar, and string quartets. She fundamentally misunderstood the architecture of luxury event planning. Retainers belong to the named contract holder, not the calendar date. I navigated to the regional vendor directory. I located the file associated with the Frank 40th Anniversary Gala. With a few swift keystrokes, I severed the link between my personal escrow account and her newly claimed event. Then I adjusted the risk parameters on her specific profile. I selected a bright red flag from the drop-down menu: high risk, cash only, no net 30 terms. I hit execute. The system instantly broadcast the updated compliance directive to every premier supplier in New York. If Evelyn wanted to host a party, she would have to pay for every single napkin in advance using liquid funds her husband no longer possessed. 10 minutes later, a notification pinged on my device. I tapped the voicemail icon and lifted the speaker to my ear. "Victoria, darling, it is Henri." The hushed, frantic voice of my preferred luxury florist echoed through the tiny speaker. The sound of clipping shears and rushing water played in the background of his studio. "I just received the corporate alert regarding the Saturday date. Your mother-in-law contacted my atelier an hour ago, demanding we swap the pastel hydrangeas for imported cascading orchids. She tried to bill it against your original deposit. Per your new compliance lock, I informed her we only take orders authorized by your management group. Her revised invoice requires a 100% cash wire by noon today." She was less than pleased. "Call me when you can." A genuine smile touched my lips. Henri crafted floral arrangements for visiting dignitaries. He did not tolerate entitled suburban matrons shouting at his staff over the phone. Footsteps padded heavily down the carpeted stairs. David walked into the kitchen, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He wore a crisp white dress shirt, his expensive silk tie hanging loose around his neck. He looked the part of the successful junior executive. Knowing what I now knew, the costume looked pathetic. "Morning," he mumbled, reaching past me to grab a ceramic mug from the cupboard. "Did you sleep well?" "Like a rock," I lied smoothly. My voice held zero trace of the devastation I had processed hours earlier. I poured myself a fresh cup of dark roast, savoring the bitter aroma, and took a seat at the breakfast nook. I crossed my legs, arranged my expression into a mask of serene compliance, and waited. David had barely taken his first sip when his cell phone began to vibrate across the wooden table. The caller ID flashed his mother's name. He sighed, rubbing his temples, and answered on speakerphone. "David, what is happening with these vendors?" Evelyn shrieked. Her voice lacked its usual polished cadence. It was shrill, bordering on panic. "I just spent the last 40 minutes calling the caterer, the florist, and the valet service. They are all refusing to honor the previous deposit structure." David blinked, confusion washing over his face. "What do you mean they are refusing?" "You took the Saturday slot. The vendors are already locked in. They are demanding full payment up front." Evelyn snapped her breath, hitching through the receiver. "Henri told me the account is flagged. He wants $12,000 wired by noon for the orchids." The caterer sent an invoice for $30,000, payable immediately via certified check. They will not accept Richard's Platinum card. They said we are classified as a cash-only client. "This is absurd. We are the Franks." I brought the rim of my coffee mug to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. The dark roast tasted exceptionally rich. "Mom, please calm down," David pleaded, his eyes darting toward me. I kept my gaze soft, projecting the image of a helpful, concerned wife. "Did you explain who Dad is?" "Of course I did," she hissed. "They do not care." The catering director practically laughed at me. He said corporate updated their risk matrix this morning. "David, your father cannot wire $42,000 today. His capital is tied up in the commercial restructuring." That was a polite way of saying her husband was secretly broke. "Just use the money Victoria put down." David suggested rubbing the back of his neck. His ignorance of basic contract law was staggering. "Tell them to draw from the original balance." "I tried," Evelyn wailed, the facade of the untouchable matriarch cracking wide open. The venue manager said her funds were moved to a secure escrow. "We are starting from zero. David, you need to fix this. Pull the cash from your joint savings. The investors are expecting a Michelin-level experience. If we serve them cheap appetizers, the private equity deal falls apart. Wire me the $42,000 right now." David froze. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. He stared at the glowing phone on the table as if it were a venomous snake. He could not wire his mother the money. He did not have it. The joint savings account he was supposed to manage was depleted, drained by endless trips to boutique hotels and luxury spas with his secret girlfriend. The terror in his eyes was visceral. He was trapped between the demands of his status-obsessed parents and the damning reality of his own embezzlement. "I cannot do that, Mom," David stammered, his voice cracking. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "Our savings are locked up in long-term cryptocurrency yields. There are steep penalties for early withdrawal. It takes days to liquidate." I watched him spin the lie with practiced ease. If I had not spent the night tracing his illicit transactions, I might have believed him. My chest tightened briefly at the casual nature of his deception, but the auditor inside me cataloged the moment as further evidence. "I do not care about your crypto penalties," Evelyn yelled. The desperation in her tone was palpable. "We are losing the vendors. The entire gala is going to collapse. You have to find a way to pay them." "Maybe I interrupted, my voice soft and unassuming. You should go down to the estate in person, Evelyn." David looked at me, surprised I had spoken. Through the phone, the line fell silent as my mother-in-law paused to listen. "The venue holds the master contracts," I explained, leaning forward, playing the role of the naive, supportive daughter-in-law. "If there is a misunderstanding with the vendor compliance, the general manager can override it. You just need to sit down with him, assert your position as the new host, and sign the updated transfer forms. Once you establish primary authority on paper, the vendors will likely drop the cash demands." It was a flawless, logical suggestion. It also happened to be bait. "Yes," Evelyn breathed, grasping at the lifeline. Her tone shifted, regaining a fraction of its usual arrogance. "Yes, you are right. They are just confused by the transition. I will drive down to the Glasshouse estate right now and demand to see the director. I will sign whatever administrative nonsense they need to clear this up." "Good luck," I murmured gently. David ended the call. He exhaled a long, shaky breath and dragged his hands down his face. "Thank you," he muttered, unable to meet my eyes. "She is just stressed about the investors, I know," I replied. I stood up, took my empty mug to the sink, and rinsed it out. Family supports family. David nodded, oblivious to the irony, and hurried out the door to his office, desperate to escape the mounting pressure. I watched his car back out of the driveway, my reflection caught in the window glass. Evelyn was speeding toward the country estate, convinced she was about to bully a venue manager into submission. She thought signing a few forms would restore her stolen grandeur. She did not realize those specific administrative documents were drafted by my legal team. By attempting to bypass the vendor lock in person, she was about to sign a liability waiver that would bind her husband's personal assets to a disastrous, irrevocable financial trap. The air inside the boutique Manhattan hotel lobby smelled of fresh lilies and expensive floor wax. I sat in a secluded velvet booth running a routine compliance check on their upcoming winter galas. My work tablet rested on my lap. The high-definition screen displayed rows of dense legal code. I tapped the glass surface, cross-referencing vendor insurance policies for a corporate client. A waiter wearing a crisp black vest placed a fresh double espresso on the table. The ceramic cup clicked softly against the matching saucer. I nodded my thanks and took a slow sip. The bitter espresso grounded my racing thoughts. My mind drifted from the luxury hotel around me to the glass-walled estate 50 miles away on Long Island. By now, Evelyn would be standing in the grand foyer of the Glasshouse estate. I pictured her in her designer trench coat, demanding to speak to the general manager. She believed her social status acted as a universal skeleton key. She expected the venue staff to cower, apologize, and hand over the vendor reins without a single fight. She was right about one thing. The manager would smile. He would offer her a glass of imported sparkling water. Then he would slide a sleek leather folio across his polished mahogany desk. He would tell her that to bypass the vendor holds and assume full control of the prime Saturday date, she simply needed to update the primary host authorization. Evelyn loathed reading the fine print. To her, administrative paperwork was a tedious task meant for assistants or hired help. She would see her own name printed at the top of the crisp white page, grab a heavy luxury pen, and sign at the bottom. She would never bother reading the 3 dense pages sandwiched in the middle. I knew this for a fact because I wrote those exact 3 pages. 6 months ago, I drafted the corporate restructuring protocols for the entire Hudson Valley Hospitality Group. I created a specific document called the Tier 1 Platinum Liability Agreement. It was designed to protect luxury venues from high-risk clients who projected wealth but lacked actual liquid capital. My corporate smartphone vibrated against the velvet seat cushion. A soft chime indicated a priority administrative alert. I set my espresso down and picked up the device. The screen lit up with a biometric authentication request. I pressed my thumb to the sensor. A digital envelope appeared carrying the official crest of the Glasshouse estate. The subject line read, "Transfer of liability executed." I opened the secure file. There at the bottom of the digital document was Evelyn's sprawling, elegant signature. She had signed it. Blinded by her own arrogance and the desperate need to secure her anniversary gala, she had legally bound herself to the contract. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I swiped to the secondary authorization page, which required corporate management approval to finalize the transfer. I tapped the green icon, casually approving the digital signature notification, while sitting in a hotel lobby 30 miles away. The system logged my approval. The snare snapped shut. By signing that specific tier of liability, Evelyn triggered an irrevocable cascade of financial obligations. First, the contract legally severed my original $25,000 deposit from the event. My money was now permanently locked in the corporate escrow, untouchable by anyone except me. Second, the Platinum waiver required the new host to provide a non-refundable $150,000 damage and cancellation guarantee. It was an ironclad clause. If the event failed to happen, or if the vendors were not paid in full by the stipulated deadline, the venue held the legal right to place an immediate lien on the host's personal assets. Evelyn had just mortgaged her husband's dwindling estate for a dinner party. Richard's remaining liquid cash, his luxury cars, his equity in their suburban mansion, all of it was now legally bound to a Saturday night reservation they could not afford to execute. It was a flawless trap, woven entirely out of their own boundless entitlement. I locked my phone and slid it into my blazer pocket. The satisfaction was a warm glow in my chest, a stark contrast to the cold devastation I had felt staring at David's embezzlement ledger mere hours earlier. Later that afternoon, I drove back to my colonial home. The autumn leaves crunched beneath my tires as I pulled into the driveway. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. I walked through the front door and found David sitting on the living room sofa. He held a heavy crystal glass filled with amber liquid. The ice cubes clinked as he raised it to his lips. He looked incredibly relaxed, the panic from the morning seemingly washed away. He set the glass on a stone coaster and offered a wide, relieved grin. "My mother fixed the vendor issue," David announced. His voice carried a smug, satisfied tone. "I told you she just needed to go down there and assert her authority." The venue manager transferred everything into her name. She said the catering director backed down the second she signed the new host agreement. I hung my trench coat in the hall closet, keeping my back to him for a long moment to hide my expression. The catering director had not backed down. The newly signed Platinum agreement simply granted the host a temporary 48-hour grace period to wire the required funds before the venue officially locked the doors. Evelyn thought she had won a battle of wills. In reality, she had just started a ticking countdown to her own bankruptcy. "That is wonderful news," I said, turning around to face him. My voice was smooth, projecting the supportive, naive wife persona he expected to see. "I am glad she sorted out the administrative confusion. She wants us to attend the preliminary menu tasting tomorrow evening," David added. He took another sip of his bourbon. "She mentioned wanting to show you how a proper society gala is curated. You should go. It will be a good learning experience for you, Victoria. She is even bringing a new friend to the tasting to help select the wine pairings, a young woman she is mentoring from the club." I stood perfectly still. The air in the living room suddenly felt heavy and suffocating. Evelyn did not mentor people out of the kindness of her heart. She cultivated strategic alliances. She paraded young, wealthy socialites around the country club, treating them like shiny new accessories to boost her own prestige. David swirled the ice in his glass. His eyes darted away, avoiding mine for a fraction of a second too long. His shoulders carried a rigid, unnatural tension. A familiar cold instinct twisted deep in my gut. He was nervous about this new friend attending the tasting. The illicit ledger I had copied the night before contained frequent charges for expensive wine bars, luxury lingerie, and Manhattan boutiques. My husband was siphoning our future to fund a secret life, and his mother was orchestrating the menu for a party she could not afford. The pieces aligned with terrifying clarity. I walked toward the kitchen, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. I would attend the tasting. I would smile, I would sample the imported caviar, and I would finally meet the expensive mistake wearing the other half of my missing savings. The private tasting suite at the Glass House Estate overlooked a manicured garden bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Tall taper candles flickered on a long mahogany table, casting dancing shadows against the silk wallpaper. The air smelled of roasted bone marrow, fresh thyme, and the crisp metallic tang of expensive champagne. I stood in the doorway for a brief second, letting my eyes adjust to the dim lighting. Evelyn sat at the head of the table. She wore a tailored emerald gown, holding a crystal flute filled with sparkling wine, dictating terms to a stiff-backed sommelier. She waved her hand dismissively, sending the man away to fetch a different vintage. David sat to her right. He was not looking at the menu. He was leaning in his shoulder, brushing against the woman seated beside him. The woman was young, perhaps 25, with glossy blonde hair draped over one shoulder. She wore a slip dress made of pearl-colored silk that clung to her slender frame. Her laughter drifted across the room, a high musical sound that caused David to smile wider than I had seen in years. He poured her a fresh glass of sparkling water, his hand lingering near hers on the polished wood. I stepped fully into the room, my heels making a soft, rhythmic tap against the hardwood floor. David flinched. He pulled his hand back, straightening his spine, a sudden deer caught in the headlights. Evelyn merely smiled, her lips stretching over her teeth in a tight, predatory curve. "Victoria, darling," Evelyn purred, gesturing toward the empty chair on the opposite side of the table. "You made it. Come sit down. We are just reviewing the preliminary hors d'oeuvres." I took my seat, placing my leather clutch on the empty chair beside me. I kept my posture relaxed, smoothing my skirt over my knees. "This is Isabella Vanguard," Evelyn announced, placing a maternal hand on the young woman's shoulder. Her father owns Vanguard Equities. She just returned from a summer in Milan. I invited her tonight because she has a brilliant palate. We need true sophistication to ensure the anniversary menu impresses Richard's colleagues. The name echoed in my mind. Vanguard Equities, a prominent private equity firm based in Manhattan. Maya had warned me that Richard was desperate for a bailout to save his sinking commercial real estate portfolio. The pieces clicked into a terrifying, seamless picture. Evelyn was not just indulging her son's infidelity, she had orchestrated it. Isabella offered a bright, practiced smile. "It is so lovely to finally meet you, Victoria. Evelyn talks about you all the time." "I am sure she does," I replied, my voice smooth and devoid of any sharp edges. "It is wonderful to meet you as well, Isabella." The waiter arrived, placing delicate porcelain plates in front of us. Seared scallops topped with a razor-thin slice of black truffle. David kept his eyes fixed on his plate, terrified to look at me, terrified to look at his mistress. He was a coward, playing a high-stakes game he lacked the spine to manage. Isabella reached across the linen tablecloth to grasp the silver salt cellar. As her arm extended, the sleeve of her silk dress slipped back, exposing her slender wrist. Gold flashed under the candlelight. My breath stopped. My heart executed a hard, violent thump against my ribs, then settled into a freezing, hollow rhythm. She wore a heavy rose gold bangle. 6 small, brilliant-cut diamonds were set into the metal, spaced evenly around the circumference. It was a Cartier love bracelet. The image of my laptop screen from the night before burned into my retinas. I saw the hidden credit union ledger. I saw the specific charge from the Fifth Avenue boutique dated 3 months prior. The amount was exactly $8,400. David had categorized the withdrawal in our joint budget as a necessary business expense for a client retention gift. I was looking at the client. The physical pain of the betrayal had burned out the night before, leaving behind a cold, clinical void. I did not feel the urge to cry. I did not feel the urge to scream. I felt the sharp, exhilarating clarity of an auditor uncovering the final piece of a massive corporate fraud. Evelyn knew. She sat there sipping her champagne, watching her son flirt with a wealthy heiress wearing jewelry purchased with my stolen savings. The profound tragedy of this family was their total lack of loyalty. They viewed marriage not as a vow, but as a disposable transactional lease. Evelyn believed my independent wealth was a threat, so she found a younger, more compliant replacement. A replacement attached to a father who could rescue Richard from bankruptcy. They were upgrading their social standing, planning to discard me the moment the financial ink dried on the Vanguard bailout. This tasting was not about selecting wine pairings. It was an audition. Evelyn was parading her new protege in front of me to assert dominance, to break my confidence, to remind me that I was an outsider who could be replaced at a moment's notice. I picked up my silver fork. I took a small bite of the scallop. "This is exquisite," I said, dabbing my lips with a linen napkin. "The truffle adds such a beautiful, earthy undertone. Do you not agree, David?" David choked on his water. He coughed, his face turning a mottled shade of red, nodding frantically. "Yes, very good." Isabella giggled, leaning closer to him. "You have to try it with the Chardonnay, David. It changes the entire flavor profile." She lifted her wine glass. As she did, David's hand slipped beneath the table. The linen cloth shifted slightly. I watched the micro-expression on Isabella's face, the sudden widening of her eyes, the faint flush rising on her cheeks. He was touching her leg. My hands did not shake, my voice did not tremble. I reached into my leather clutch and pulled out my smartphone. "I should start taking notes," I announced cheerfully, unlocking the screen. The event coordinator at my firm always says you forget the nuances of a tasting the moment you leave the room. Do you mind if I record the sommelier's descriptions? I would love to reference them for my own dinner parties. "Not at all," Evelyn said, waving her hand. "Just keep it discreet. We do not want to look like tourists." I opened the voice memo application. I hit the red circle. I placed the phone face down on the mahogany table right next to my water glass. For the next 2 hours, the microphone captured every single damning exchange. It recorded Isabella's high-pitched laughter every time David made a mediocre joke. It captured Evelyn explicitly detailing the financial connections between Vanguard Equities and Richard's upcoming real estate developments. It recorded the soft, intimate whispers exchanged between my husband and his mistress when Evelyn stepped out to use the restroom. I played my part with flawless precision. I asked Isabella about her time in Milan, feigning genuine interest. I complimented Evelyn on her impeccable taste in selecting the venue. I poured David a fresh glass of wine, smiling warmly into his terrified, guilty eyes. I was the perfect submissive daughter-in-law. They grew comfortable. The wine flowed, loosening their tongues and dropping their guards. Evelyn preened, convinced she had successfully intimidated me into silence. David relaxed, believing he had dodged a bullet, arrogant enough to think he could juggle 2 lives in the same room. As the final dessert course was cleared, Evelyn signaled for the check. "I think we have a solid menu," Evelyn declared, signing her name to the venue tab with a flourish. "The investors will be thrilled. Isabella, your insight on the caviar was invaluable." "I am just happy to help," Isabella replied, shooting a lingering look at David. I picked up my phone, stopping the recording. The digital file saved automatically, backing up to my secure cloud server. I slipped the device back into my clutch. "It was a lovely evening," I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. "Thank you for inviting me, Evelyn. It was truly illuminating." I walked out of the tasting suite, leaving them sitting at the table. The night air hit my face as I stepped out into the gravel parking lot. The stars were bright and cold above the Hudson Valley. I unlocked my car, sliding into the driver's seat. The dossier was no longer just about hidden bank accounts. I now possessed audio evidence of Evelyn's complicity and Isabella's direct involvement. The trap was fully loaded. I connected my phone to the car's Bluetooth system and dialed a number. It rang twice before she answered. The line connected. The background noise sounded like the hum of a busy Manhattan law office. "Tell me you found the blind spot," Maya said, her voice crisp and expectant. "I found the blind spot," I replied, staring at the dark silhouette of the estate in my rearview mirror. "I have the receipts, the bank transfers, and a 2-hour audio recording of Evelyn facilitating the affair with the Vanguard heiress." A low, satisfied hum vibrated through the speakers. "Bring the files to my office tomorrow morning," Maya instructed. "We are going to build a blueprint that burns their entire empire to the ground." The Thursday morning rain lashed against the large bay windows of my kitchen, distorting the view of the manicured front lawn. The sky was a sullen, bruised gray. David had departed the house an hour earlier, claiming he needed to attend a mandatory breakfast seminar in the city. The faint scent of his expensive cologne still hung in the hallway, a lingering ghost of his daily deception. I knew there was no seminar. His digital calendar, which I had covertly cloned to my own device, confirmed a reservation at a boutique bakery in Soho with Isabella Vanguard. I stood at the kitchen island nursing a mug of black coffee. The house was blissfully silent. Leo was upstairs in his playroom, entertained by a building block set and a nanny I trusted implicitly. The front doorbell chimed, a sharp sound cutting through the quiet. I unlocked the heavy oak door. Maya stepped into the foyer, shaking the rainwater from her sleek black umbrella. She wore a tailored charcoal suit that screamed Manhattan boardroom. Her expression, an unreadable mask of professional detachment. We skipped the customary greetings. The gravity of our shared agenda left no room for pleasantries. I led her into the kitchen. Maya placed her leather tote bag onto a bar stool, reached inside, and withdrew a thick, sealed manila folder. She dropped it onto the counter. The heavy paper slapped against the cold marble sliding a few inches before coming to a stop directly in front of my coffee mug. "Open it," Maya instructed, her tone devoid of any warmth. I untwisted the string closure and flipped the cover back. The top document was a mezzanine loan summary covered in red numerical flags and dense legal jargon. I flipped to the second page, then the third. As a risk analyst, reading financial distress signals was my primary language. The numbers painted a terrifying portrait of ruin. "Richard is underwater," Maya explained, leaning her elbows against the island. Her eyes tracked my reaction as I scanned the ledgers. 6 years ago, he purchased a portfolio of suburban retail centers. He bet his entire fortune on brick and mortar stability. Then the anchor tenants went bankrupt. The properties sat vacant while variable interest rates climbed. To keep the firm afloat, Richard cross-collateralized his assets. He used the family estate, the country club equity, and the remaining trust liquidity as collateral for a high-yield bridge loan. I traced a finger over the final balance column. The bridge loan matures in 30 days. Exactly. Maya nodded, a dark satisfaction glinting in her gaze. The creditors are circling. If Richard fails to secure a massive capital injection by the end of the month, they will foreclose on everything. The luxury cars, the colonial mansions, the entire illusion of the Frank family prestige will evaporate overnight. He is desperate. I picked up a printed email thread buried beneath the loan summaries. The correspondence was between Richard and an underwriting executive at Vanguard Equities. "Isabella," I whispered, the final puzzle piece locking into place. Maya offered a grim smile. Vanguard Equities is the only private equity firm willing to consider refinancing Richard's toxic debt, but they require proof of social and financial stability before they commit capital. That is why Evelyn hijacked your venue. She needs the Glasshouse estate to stage a flawless high society exhibition. If the anniversary gala looks cheap, or if the venue falls through, Vanguard walks away. The creditors call the debts. The empire burns. I closed the folder, resting my palms flat against the smooth marble. Evelyn was not just indulging an affair out of spite. She was actively facilitating David's infidelity with Isabella Vanguard to forge a blood tie with the underwriting firm. She planned to trade her son to an heiress in exchange for a financial bailout. I was merely an obstacle blocking the transaction. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and produced the encrypted USB drive I had compiled the night before. I set it on the counter next to her folder. I found David's hidden accounts. I stated my voice, echoing the same clinical detachment Maya possessed. He drained our joint savings. He spent $18,000 on a secret checking ledger over the past 7 months. Boutique hotels, luxury spa retreats, and an $8,000 Cartier bracelet I saw resting on Isabella's wrist during the tasting last night. Maya stared at the small metal drive. Her jaw tightened. The revelation of her brother-in-law's theft stripped away the last polite veneer of our family dynamic. Evelyn knows about the embezzlement. I continued pulling my smartphone from my pocket. I queued up the audio file from the tasting and pressed play. The crisp recording filled the kitchen. Maya listened as Isabella giggled as David whispered his praises and as Evelyn explicitly linked the Vanguard funding to the success of the anniversary menu. The recording verified that the matriarch was trading my dignity for her survival. When the clip ended, Maya let out a long, slow breath. "The audacity is staggering," she murmured. "They are parading his mistress in front of you, assuming your silence is guaranteed." "They assume I am trapped," I corrected, pocketing the phone. "But they are the ones locked in a cage." I explained the compliance trap I had set the previous afternoon. I detailed the Tier 1 platinum liability waiver Evelyn had blindly signed in her rush to steal the Saturday reservation. I explained how the contract severed my original $25,000 deposit, placing the entire financial burden of the event squarely onto Richard's personal assets. The venue requires a $150,000 non-refundable damage and cancellation guarantee. I told Maya, watching her eyes widen as the genius of the snare became apparent. The automated billing system will run the final draft on Friday morning, 24 hours before the event, and Richard has zero liquid capital to cover that draft. Maya finished the realization washing over her features. The transaction will fail. The venue manager will demand a certified cash wire by Friday evening, I confirmed. Evelyn will panic. She will turn to David, demanding he use his savings to save the family honor. But David cannot rescue her because he gave all his cash to Isabella. The overlapping layers of their deceit were barreling toward a catastrophic collision. The marital betrayal, the hijacked party, and the corporate insolvency were destined to detonate simultaneously on a single weekend. "We need to ensure Thomas does not bail them out," I warned, recognizing the only remaining loophole. "If Richard begs your husband for the cash, Evelyn might escape the venue lockout." Maya laughed, a brief, humorless sound. "Thomas cannot authorize a wire transfer without my secondary signature. I handle all our offshore holding structures. I have already flagged our primary accounts for a routine tax security review. Our liquidity is frozen for the next 10 business days. Thomas could not buy them a cup of coffee right now, let alone save their estate." We stood in the quiet kitchen, two women, bound by a shared understanding of leverage and retribution. We held the kill switch to the entire Frank legacy. There was no need for screaming matches or dramatic confrontations. We simply had to let their own arrogance dictate their destruction. "We have the timeline mapped," Maya said, placing her hand over the manila folder. "Friday morning, the venue demands the cash. Friday afternoon, the family turns on each other. Saturday night, the gates lock. There is one step left to guarantee the blast radius only hits them." I noted, tracing the rim of my coffee mug. "Evelyn still views me as a hostile threat. If she suspects I am fighting her for the party, she might scrutinize the venue contracts to find leverage against me. We need her to feel invincible. We need her to lower her guard entirely." Maya tilted her head, her sharp legal mind instantly grasping my strategy. "You need to give her a public victory." Tonight, I affirmed my gaze, shifting toward the gray rain beating against the window pane. We are attending a family dinner at the country club. I am going to publicly surrender the party. I will hand Evelyn the crown in front of everyone. Once I formally ceded control, the venue software would permanently lock Evelyn into the liability tier without any avenue for a reversal. The trap required a sacrifice of pride, a theatrical display of defeat to seal their fate. Maya zipped her leather tote and headed toward the foyer. Play the part, Victoria. Let her gloat. I locked the door behind her, the echo of her departure settling into the quiet house. I walked upstairs to pick out my wardrobe for the evening. I needed to look subdued, exhausted, and thoroughly beaten. I was preparing to hand my mother-in-law a loaded weapon, confident she would point it directly at herself. The heavy iron gates of the Frank family estate swung inward, allowing my sedan to glide up the long, circular driveway. The property stood as a monument to mid-century excess, wrapped in creeping ivy and bathed in the soft glow of golden landscape lighting. To the untrained eye, it looked like a fortress of permanent generational wealth. Knowing the truth about Richard's toxic commercial bridge loans transformed the sprawling brick manor into a fragile theatrical set. It was a hollow shell, waiting for the inevitable wrecking ball. I parked my vehicle behind David's imported sports car, turning off the engine. I sat in the quiet cabin for a moment, regulating my breathing. I had chosen my wardrobe for the evening with tactical precision. I wore a plain beige cashmere sweater, simple trousers, and flat shoes. I applied minimal makeup, skipping my usual sharp eyeliner, deliberately allowing the dark circles under my eyes to show. I needed to project total exhaustion. I needed them to see a woman who lacked the stamina for another fight. Inside the grand foyer, the scent of lemonwood polish and roasted lamb hung thick in the warm air. Richard sat at the head of the long cherry wood dining table, holding a heavy crystal tumbler of aged scotch. He was loudly recounting a fabricated story to Thomas about the impending Vanguard equities deal, projecting an aura of supreme confidence. The false bravado was nauseating. Richard spoke of millions in capital injections, as if the funds were already resting safely in his checking account, ignoring the reality that his primary club membership remained suspended for non-payment. Evelyn sat opposite her husband, adjusting a lavish floral centerpiece with sharp, quick movements. She wore a tailored crimson blouse, her posture rigid and expectant. When I walked into the dining room, the conversation halted. David stood near the vintage mahogany sideboard, pouring himself a glass of red wine. He offered me a tight, nervous smile. He was still worried I might cause a scene regarding Isabella Vanguard or the hijacked venue vendors. I kept my shoulders slumped, averting my gaze as I took my seat next to him. Maya sat across from me, sipping sparkling water. She wore a sleek silver blouse, her expression an unreadable mask of polite interest. We did not exchange a single knowing look. We were two professionals executing a flawless undercover operation within enemy territory. Dinner commenced with the arrival of the first course. The clinking of silver forks against fine china echoed in the cavernous room. The tension was a palpable weight pressing down on the table. Evelyn chewed a piece of roasted asparagus, swallowed deliberately, and leveled her gaze at me. She was ready for a war. She expected me to demand my $25,000 deposit back. She anticipated a bitter argument over the premium caterer and the luxury florist. She wanted the thrill of crushing my resistance in front of her golden child Thomas and her husband. Victoria Evelyn began, her voice carrying a sharp, condescending edge. The event coordinator at the Glasshouse estate called me this afternoon. He mentioned there is still a secondary authorization hold on the main ballroom. I assumed you would have cleared that administrative hurdle by now. We have less than 48 hours before the guests arrive. The table went dead silent. Richard stopped swirling his scotch. Thomas looked down at his plate. Maya took a slow, measured sip of her water. David stiffened beside me, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his wine glass. He braced himself for the explosion. I set my fork down on the edge of my porcelain plate. I kept my head slightly bowed, staring at the linen tablecloth. I let a long, heavy sigh escape my lips, channeling every ounce of grief and exhaustion I had felt over the past 2 days into my performance. You do not need to worry about the secondary hold, Evelyn, I said, keeping my voice soft and defeated. I lowered my shoulders, visually shrinking into my chair. I thought about it a lot today. You were right. Evelyn blinked, thrown off balance by the sudden lack of resistance. Right about what exactly? About Leo, I replied, forcing a slight tremor into my tone. He is only 4 years old. He will not remember a lavish party in a grand ballroom. It was silly of me to insist on keeping the date when you and Richard need the venue for something so crucial to the family business. A collective exhale swept across the dining room. The relief radiating from David was so intense it practically generated heat. I am stepping back, I continued, finally lifting my eyes to meet Evelyn's shocked gaze. I do not want to fight anymore. I concede the venue to you. You can have the Saturday night slot. The caterer, the florist, everything. I will send the final release email to the venue manager right now, officially waiving my primary claim. Evelyn stared at me, her lips parting in utter disbelief, before a slow, triumphant smile spread across her face. The matriarch had won. She had broken the independent daughter-in-law, forcing her into submission. The victory fed her ego like pure oxygen. That is very mature of you, Victoria, Evelyn preened, sitting taller in her chair. I am glad you finally understand the hierarchy of our needs. The Vanguard investors require a flawless presentation. We will make sure to bring Leo a slice of cake on Sunday. David leaned over his chest, puffing out with unwarranted pride. He reached out and placed his heavy hand on my shoulder, giving it a firm, patronizing pat. Thank you, he murmured, his voice dripping with magnanimous condescension. This is for the best, Victoria. Let my mother have her moment. You did the right thing for the family. I did not flinch. I did not pull away from his touch. I offered him a weak, subservient nod. I reached into my pocket and retrieved my smartphone. I opened my encrypted corporate email client. I typed a brief, formal message to the general manager of the Glasshouse estate. I instructed him to permanently release my secondary hold on the Saturday reservation and officially transfer 100% of the event liability to the new primary host, Evelyn Frank. I pressed send. The digital command beamed through the cellular network, striking the venue's automated compliance software with lethal precision. My verbal surrender in the dining room was merely theater. The email was the trigger. By formally seating the party in writing, I activated the final clause of the Tier 1 Platinum liability waiver Evelyn had signed the day before. The system instantly severed all my remaining financial ties to the gala. Simultaneously, the software shifted the entire financial burden directly onto Evelyn and Richard. The venue now possessed the legal authorization to run the final draft for the $150,000 damage guarantee. I locked my phone and placed it back into my pocket. The snare was now permanently sealed. There were no overrides. There were no grace periods left. Richard raised his glass of scotch, a jovial, booming laugh echoing through the room. To family, he toasted, gesturing toward his wife and his sons. To loyalty, and to a very prosperous weekend ahead with Vanguard Equities. Everyone at the table raised their glasses, the crystal chiming together in a chorus of fabricated unity. I lifted my water glass and joined the toast, hiding my cold satisfaction behind a weary smile. They were ecstatic. They were celebrating their social triumph, convinced they had secured their future by sacrificing my dignity. They were completely unaware that the countdown to their total financial ruin had just been activated. The automated billing system was scheduled to run at 8 o'clock the following morning. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of arrogant chatter. Evelyn discussed her imported caviar selections, while David bragged about his upcoming golf trip, secure in the delusion that his hidden embezzlement remained undiscovered. I ate my food in silence, playing the role of the vanquished outsider to perfection. When the evening finally concluded, I walked out to my car. The cold night air felt sharp and revitalizing against my skin. David told me he was staying behind for a moment to discuss a few final details with his father. I knew he was actually lingering to call Isabella in private. I started the engine and drove away from the brick manor, leaving them to their hollow kingdom. My work here was finished. Tomorrow morning, the venue would demand a fortune Richard did not possess. The family would turn on each other in a desperate scramble for cash. But I would not be around to witness the initial fallout. While Evelyn planned a massive gala built on toxic debt, I needed to pack a travel bag. I was taking my son far away from their toxic orbit to give him the private, peaceful celebration he actually deserved. The Friday morning sun cast a pale light across our bedroom floor. I folded a small denim jacket and placed it inside a canvas duffel bag. Down the hall, David was adjusting his silk tie in front of the tall mirror. He hummed a low tune, entirely oblivious to the fact that his wife and 4-year-old son were packing for a weekend trip. He told me he had to spend the next 48 hours managing the final logistics for the anniversary gala. He claimed Richard needed his help, negotiating seating charts with the investors. I knew the truth. His cloned calendar showed a 2-day reservation at a luxury suite in Tribeca with the Vanguard heiress. He was planning to abandon his family to play house with his mistress, returning just in time for the Saturday evening red carpet. I zipped the duffel shut. Leo sat on the edge of the mattress, kicking his small feet, clutching a stuffed brown bear. "Are we going to the party now?" Leo asked, his voice bright and eager. "We are going to a special party," I told him, smoothing a stray curl from his forehead. "Just for you." I hoisted the bag onto my shoulder and led him downstairs. David was waiting near the front door, tapping his leather loafers against the hardwood floor. He glanced at my casual clothing and the luggage, his brow furrowing for a fraction of a second before apathy smoothed it away. "You are taking him to your sister's place upstate?" David asked, barely paying attention to his own inquiry. He checked his gold wristwatch. "A quiet cabin," I lied seamlessly. "I figured you and your parents needed the house to yourselves to prepare for the gala. We will stay out of your way until Sunday." David offered a tight, relieved nod. "Perfect. That is very thoughtful, Victoria. My mother is already having a meltdown over the floral arrangements. The less distraction, the better. Have a safe drive." He did not kneel down to hug his son. He did not wish the boy a happy birthday. He merely ruffled Leo's hair, a hollow gesture, devoid of any genuine affection, and walked out the door to meet his girlfriend. I watched his car disappear down the street. A profound sense of liberation settled into my chest. The toxic anchor was gone. 2 hours later, my tires crunched against a winding gravel driveway hidden deep within the Catskill Mountains. Through my risk analysis network, I had access to unlisted, private retreats utilized by corporate executives seeking total isolation. The property I secured was a sprawling timber lodge surrounded by 80 acres of pristine, untouched forest. There were no marble columns, no crystal chandeliers, and no performative society neighbors to impress. There was only warm cedar wood, a crackling stone hearth, and the sound of the wind rustling through the pine trees. I parked the vehicle and unbuckled Leo. He scrambled out of the back seat, his eyes wide with wonder as he took in the vast open space. A sleek black SUV rolled up the driveway moments later. Maya stepped out, dressed in comfortable denim and a soft wool sweater, looking remarkably different from the sharp attorney who navigated Manhattan boardrooms. Her 2 young children piled out of the back doors immediately, sprinting toward Leo with joyous shouts. Maya walked over and handed me a steaming cup of artisan coffee she had purchased in the village. "No cellular reception for the next 3 miles, Maya noted, gesturing toward the dense tree line. "Just satellite internet inside the lodge. We are completely off the grid." "How does it feel?" "It feels like breathing for the first time in a decade," I replied, taking a slow sip of the warm, rich brew. We spent the afternoon celebrating my son the way a child deserves to be celebrated. There were no seating charts dictated by net worth. There were no photographers documenting the event for a country club newsletter. We hired a local baker who delivered a whimsical, bright blue cake covered in edible dinosaurs. The highlight of the day arrived in a rusted red trailer. I had contracted a local sanctuary to bring a small, private petting zoo to the lodge meadows. The autumn sun warmed our shoulders as the children ran through the tall grass. Leo sat in a patch of clovers holding a small paper cup filled with grain. A miniature speckled goat nudged his tiny hand, its soft nose tickling his palm. Leo let out a sound of pure, unbridled joy. He tilted his head back and laughed a bright, contagious sound that echoed across the quiet valley. I stood near the wooden fence watching my boy. The heavy armor I wore to survive the Frank family melted away. I grew up in a modest household in upstate New York, raised by parents who measured success by the warmth of a dinner table, not the balance of a bank account. My mother used to bake my birthday cakes from scratch. My father built my treehouse with his own blistered hands. I had allowed David's elite pedigree to blind me to his lack of character. I had tolerated their cold, transactional existence because I believed I was compromising for the sake of my marriage. Watching Leo laugh, shielded entirely from the adults who viewed him as an inconvenience, solidified my internal resolve. The elaborate trap I had set back on Long Island was not born out of petty vengeance. It was a necessary amputation. I was excising a sickness from my son's life before it could infect his spirit. As dusk settled over the mountains, painting the sky in vibrant strokes of violet and orange, we ushered the exhausted children inside. We fed them warm macaroni and cheese, drew them baths, and tucked them into cozy bunk beds on the second floor. Maya and I retreated to the wraparound wooden deck. We sat in plush chairs, a bottle of full-bodied Cabernet resting on the small table between us. The night air grew crisp. The only sounds were the distant hoot of a barn owl and the soft crackle of the fire pit burning a few yards away. It is hard to imagine the sheer level of panic currently unfolding back in the city, Maya murmured, swirling the dark liquid in her glass. I pulled my corporate smartphone from my jacket pocket. The device operated on a secure satellite band, bypassing the dead zone of the mountains. I had kept the screen dark all day, refusing to let their poison seep into my son's celebration. Now the party was over. The children were asleep. It was time to check the perimeter. I unlocked the screen and opened my encrypted hospitality dashboard. I navigated to the billing portal for the Glasshouse estate. The automated draft had executed exactly at 8 o'clock that morning. The status bar glowed in bright, undeniable red text. Transaction failed. Insufficient funds. A secondary alert detailed the venue's protocol. The general manager had issued a formal notice of default to Evelyn Frank at noon. She was given a 12-hour window to produce a certified wire transfer for $150,000, or the gates would be padlocked and the caterers sent home. I minimized the application and opened my personal message inbox. My screen populated with a cascade of notifications. There were 14 missed calls from David. The voicemails were frantic, escalating from confusion to outright terror. His text messages painted a vivid picture of a man watching his world burn down to the studs. "Victoria, please pick up." The first message read time-stamped at 1 p.m. "My mother is having a breakdown. The venue is demanding the damage guarantee. They say you signed it over to her. Why would you do that?" The next message arrived 2 hours later. "I need you to unlock the joint savings. My mother is threatening to cut me out of the trust if I do not wire her the cash. The bank says my access is restricted. Victoria, call me back. This is an emergency." The final message, sent mere minutes ago, lacked any of his usual arrogant polish. "My dad just found out about the venue. He is losing his mind. He told me to use my crypto portfolio. I do not have the money, Victoria. I do not have it. Where are you? Please help me." I stared at the glowing text. The frantic pleas were the digital echoes of a coward realizing the walls were closing in. He was trapped. Evelyn was demanding funds he had already spent on Isabella. Richard was facing the collapse of the Vanguard deal. The pristine illusion of their high society empire was fracturing under the weight of their own deceit. I locked the phone and set it face down on the wooden table. I picked up my wine glass and leaned back in my chair, staring up at the vast, glittering canopy of stars. "Did the draft fail?" Maya asked softly, noting the calm expression settling over my features. "The draft failed," I confirmed, taking a slow sip of the Cabernet. "The venue issued the default notice. They are turning on each other right now. Tomorrow evening, the elite guests would arrive at a padlocked gate. But tonight, the Frank family was trapped in a mansion on Long Island, suffocating on the smoke of their burning legacy. while the woman they tried to destroy sat in perfect, undisturbed peace. The morning mist clung to the pine trees outside the timber lodge, a thick blanket of gray that mirrored the quiet stillness of the Catskill Mountains. I sat on the wooden deck, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, holding a ceramic mug of black coffee. The only sound was the rhythmic tapping of a woodpecker somewhere deep in the forest. It was Saturday. In a few hours, the elite members of Long Island society would begin preparing their designer evening wear for the Frank Anniversary Gala. They were preparing for a party that no longer existed. I rested my corporate smartphone on my lap. The screen was dark, but the internal drive held the digital wreckage of the past 24 hours. I had spent Friday shielding my son from the fallout, focusing entirely on his birthday. Now, with Leo sleeping soundly upstairs, I allowed myself to review the timeline of my mother-in-law's destruction. I unlocked the device and opened my voicemail inbox. There were 11 new messages from Evelyn, all recorded the previous day. I pressed play on the very first one, time-stamped at 10 in the morning. "Victoria, pick up your phone," Evelyn commanded. Her voice held its usual sharp edge of entitlement, but a faint tremor of embarrassment leaked through the audio. "I am at the Botanical Spa in the Hamptons. There is some ridiculous error with Richard's primary account. I tried to pay for my Pregala treatments, and the front desk declined my Platinum card. Isabella is sitting right next to me in the waiting area. Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to have a card declined in front of the Vanguard family? Call your banking contacts and fix this routing error immediately." I took a slow sip of my coffee. The hot liquid warmed my chest. There was no routing error. Maya had been entirely correct about the commercial bridge loans. Richard was tapped out. The creditors had likely placed a freeze on his revolving credit lines the moment he missed his latest mezzanine payment. Evelyn had walked into a luxury spa, expecting to flaunt her wealth in front of her son's mistress, only to be rejected by a plastic machine. That was merely the pebble before the avalanche. I deleted the spa voicemail and opened my secure hospitality dashboard. The interface loaded, displaying the active compliance logs for the Glasshouse estate. As a risk analyst, I possessed administrative clearance to view the venue's internal communication records. At exactly noon on Friday, the automated billing software had attempted to draft the $150,000 damage guarantee from the account Evelyn had provided. The system log showed a bright red rejection code, insufficient liquidity. 10 minutes later, the general manager, Mr. Preston, had placed a direct call to the primary host. The system recorded a brief summary of their interaction. I read the sterile professional notes typed by the manager. Client informed of draft failure. Client became argumentative, insisting the venue draw from the original $25,000 deposit. Client reminded that said deposit was secured under a separate corporate entity and legally severed upon her signing the Tier 1 agreement. Client issued standard default notice. 12-hour window provided to submit certified wire transfer. The trap I designed was fundamentally airtight. High-end event spaces operate on strict logistical margins. They order perishable inventory, imported flowers, and premium staffing days in advance. When a client signs a Platinum liability waiver, they are not just renting a room. They are underwriting the entire operational cost of the weekend. If the funds fail to materialize, the venue cannot simply absorb the loss. The contract holds the signatory personally responsible for the guaranteed amount, regardless of whether the event actually takes place. I closed the audit log and returned to my voicemail inbox. I skipped to a message Evelyn left at 3 in the afternoon. The arrogant tone was entirely gone. "Victoria, where are you?" Evelyn asked her, breath catching in her throat. Her words rushed together, fueled by genuine panic. "Mr. Preston is demanding a certified wire by midnight. He said you locked the original deposit in a corporate escrow. I do not understand what you did, but you need to release it right now. Richard cannot access his liquid funds until Monday. The venue is threatening to lock the gates. Please call me back." I let the recording play out. She was begging the woman she had spent years trying to diminish. She believed a quick phone call could reverse the legal snare. She did not comprehend that my corporate escrow was permanently sealed. Even if I wanted to release the funds, the compliance software required a 30-day processing period. The final voicemail arrived at 8 o'clock on Friday evening. "Victoria, answer me." Evelyn was weeping. The sound was harsh and ragged, echoing through the tiny speaker. "David says you are upstate. Why are you upstate?" "I told David to use his savings to cover the wire, but he says he does not have it. He is lying. He has to be lying. Make him give me the money. The Vanguard investors are arriving tomorrow. If the doors are locked, Richard will lose the firm. They will take our house, Victoria." I ended the playback and set the phone face down on the wooden deck. The cold logic of the situation was staggering. Evelyn had turned to her son, demanding he play the role of the loyal savior. She had demanded he drain his cryptocurrency investments to rescue the family honor. But David could not produce a single dollar. He had squandered his savings on boutique hotels, luxury lingerie, and a rose gold Cartier bracelet for Isabella Vanguard. He had traded his family's salvation for a secret affair. The wooden screen door creaked open behind me. Maya stepped out onto the deck, holding her own mug of tea. She wore a thick wool sweater, her dark hair pulled back into a messy knot. She took a seat in the Adirondack chair next to mine, pulling her knees up to her chest. "You have that analytical look on your face," Maya noted, staring out at the mist rolling through the pine branches. "The one you get right before you finalize a corporate audit." "I was just reviewing the timeline," I replied, keeping my voice low so the children would not wake. The 12-hour window expired at midnight. The Glasshouse estate is officially dark. Maya blew a stream of steam from her mug. "Have they figured out the secondary clause yet?" "Not yet," I said. That was the most devastating aspect of the Tier 1 agreement. Evelyn believed the worst outcome was a canceled party and a locked gate. She thought she was merely losing a venue. She had not bothered to read the non-compete and damage clauses buried on page 3. Because she failed to meet the financial deadline, the venue was legally required to recoup their projected losses. On Monday morning, the Glasshouse estate would file a formal collection notice for the entire $150,000 balance. If Richard failed to pay, the venue's legal team would place a lien on his remaining commercial assets. Evelyn had not just ruined a party. She had single-handedly handed a loaded gun to her husband's creditors. "David must be crawling out of his skin," Maya murmured, a dark amusement threading her words. "He is trapped in that house, with his mother screaming about the venue, his father realizing the Vanguard deal is dead, and his own bank accounts showing a zero balance." "He dug the grave," I pointed out, tracing the rim of my ceramic mug. I just handed him the shovel. The sun began to burn through the morning mist, casting bright, fractured rays of light across the forest floor. The air felt incredibly clean. I thought about the 200 high society guests currently preparing their outfits back in New York. I thought about the catering staff who had already been sent home, and the heavy iron padlocks currently securing the grand wrought iron gates of the estate. Tonight, the Frank family would put on their tailored suits and their designer gowns. They would drive to the venue, desperately hoping they could charm their way past the security guards. They still believed their status meant something. They still believed the rules did not apply to them. "We should take the kids down to the lake after breakfast," I suggested, turning to Maya with a genuine smile. "Leo wants to try catching frogs." Maya nodded, returning the smile. "Frogs sound perfect. Let the city deal with the snakes." I left my phone on the table and walked back inside the warm, quiet lodge. I had no intention of answering any calls today. The trap had closed. The financial bleeding had begun. All that remained was the public execution. The midday sun hung high above the Catskill Mountains, casting sharp shadows across the timber deck of the luxury lodge. I sat in a plush armchair, a soft cashmere throw draped over my knees. Leo was napping upstairs, exhausted from a morning spent chasing butterflies near the lake. The profound silence of the forest offered a stark contrast to the digital connection currently buzzing in my right ear. Maya had departed the cabin at dawn. She drove back to Long Island to fulfill her role as Thomas's dutiful wife, arriving at the Frank estate just as the Saturday afternoon panic began to crest. We planned this phase meticulously. Upon entering the manor, she slipped her secondary corporate smartphone onto a high bookshelf in the grand living room, initiated a call to my secure line, and left the microphone active. I rested my head against the wooden chair, closing my eyes to focus entirely on the audio feed streaming through my wireless earpiece. Heavy footsteps paced across a marble floor. The sharp, rapid clicks of expensive leather shoes echoed through the cavernous room. Richard was furious. His booming baritone vibrated through the tiny speaker, devoid of the jovial polish he usually reserved for his country club peers. $150,000, Evelyn, Richard shouted, his voice cracking under the strain. The venue manager just forwarded the default notice to my business email. You signed a Tier 1 Platinum waiver without consulting my legal team. Do you possess any concept of what you have done to this family? A muffled, ragged sob answered him. Evelyn was hyperventilating. I thought the original deposit covered it. Victoria told me she stepped back. She told me I could have the date. I just wanted the gala to look perfect for the Vanguard investors. The Vanguard deal requires an illusion of liquidity, not a confirmed bankruptcy, Richard fired back, the raw desperation stripping away his patriarchal facade. He built his identity on leverage and intimidation, yet he found himself cornered by a simple hospitality contract. My primary credit lines are suspended. The bridge loan matures next week. If we do not open those iron gates tonight, the private equity firm walks. The creditors will seize this house by Tuesday. The sound of shattering glass pierced the audio feed. Someone had thrown a crystal tumbler against the stone fireplace. David, Richard barked, shifting his wrath toward his youngest son, stop standing there like a frightened child. This is your mother's mess, but you are going to fix it. Wire the required capital to the Glasshouse estate right now. Dad, I cannot just, David stammered, his voice trembling. Do not formulate excuses, Richard interrupted, his tone lethal. You boasted about your cryptocurrency yields all summer. You claim your joint savings portfolio is outperforming the market. Liquidate whatever you have to liquidate. I will reimburse you when Vanguard signs the restructuring agreement on Monday. Execute the wire, David. I leaned forward in my chair on the cabin deck, my pulse quickening. This was the exact intersection of their deceit. Through the earpiece, the frantic, erratic tapping of a touchscreen filled the silence. David was desperately mashing his password into his banking application. He was a coward, cornered by his own fabricated success. He needed to show his father a functional portfolio, but the funds he intended to use had vanished into Manhattan boutiques and luxury hotel suites. The server must be down, David muttered, his breath coming in shallow, panicked gasps. The application is rejecting my credentials. It keeps refreshing the login portal. Give me the device, Richard demanded. I just need a minute to reset the biometric lock, David pleaded, the distinct sound of shuffling feet indicating he was backing away. Hand me the phone, David. A brief struggle ensued, followed by a tense, suffocating quiet. I pictured Richard staring down at the glowing screen. When Richard finally spoke, the booming volume had vanished, replaced by a chilling, hollow whisper. What is an expedited asset freeze? Richard asked. I smiled, opening my eyes to watch a hawk circle above the distant pine trees. Earlier that week, immediately after compiling the dossier of David's illicit spending, I met with senior legal counsel. Presenting undeniable proof of marital waste and active embezzlement, my attorney filed an emergency ex parte motion with a family court judge. The judiciary granted a temporary restraining order on all our joint financial accounts to prevent further dissipation of assets. David was locked out of his own life by court order. Dad, I do not know what that means. David choked out the lie, crumbling instantly in his throat. Do not test my intelligence, Richard hissed. The screen displays a bright red notice, account frozen, pending dissolution and verified marital waste. This is a judicial mandate, David. Your wife secured a legal injunction against your portfolio. Why would a judge grant Victoria emergency control over your capital? Evelyn let out a high-pitched gasp. Victoria, what did she do? She did not do anything, Richard snapped, his sharp business instincts finally connecting the scattered dots. He turned his attention back to his son. An auditor requests an emergency asset freeze when they uncover theft. Where is the money, David? The savings you bragged about. The safety net you were supposed to maintain. I invested it, David whimpered, cornered and shrinking. Show me the ledger, Richard demanded. I cannot. The application is locked. Because you spent it, Richard concluded, his voice dropping another octave, carrying a terrifying realization. You do not have a crypto portfolio. You drained your own marriage dry. What did you purchase? David broke. The sheer weight of the confrontation crushed his fragile spine. He began to weep, a pathetic, ugly sound echoing through the grand living room. Isabella. David confessed, the name slipping out between ragged breaths. I spent it on Isabella. The hotels, the dinners, the jewelry. Evelyn knew. Mom knew about her. She encouraged it. She invited Isabella to the tasting so she could meet the family. The silence that followed was absolute. It felt as though all the oxygen had been vacuumed from the Long Island estate. You bought jewelry. Richard repeated, his tone devoid of any human emotion. You took your wife's savings, provoked an emergency judicial freeze, and spent the capital on a mistress. Mom said it was fine, David cried, desperately attempting to shift the blame. She said Isabella was a better match. She said a Cartier bracelet was a small price to pay to secure a Vanguard heiress. A Vanguard heiress, Richard bellowed the eruption, rattling the speaker in my ear. You imbecile. Isabella's father dictates the terms of my commercial bridge loan. Do you understand the severity of this conflict? Vanguard Equities demands pristine moral and financial optics before underwriting a bailout. If her father discovers you are a married, bankrupt embezzler courting his daughter with stolen funds, he will not merely reject my contract, he will actively bury my firm. I was trying to help, Evelyn interjected, her voice shrill and desperate. Isabella adores him. I thought it would forge a stronger alliance with her father. You forged a guillotine, Richard roared, the sound of a heavy wooden chair crashing against the floorboards echoing through the microphone. You hijacked a venue we cannot afford. You incurred a $150,000 default penalty. You encouraged our son to commit fraud with the daughter of our only remaining lifeline. You have both orchestrated the total annihilation of this family. The implosion was magnificent. The facade of the perfect elite dynasty shattered into a million jagged pieces. They turned on one another with vicious, unfiltered cruelty. Richard cursed his wife's superficial vanity. Evelyn screamed about Richard's failed real estate gambles. David sobbed in the corner, a ruined man caught between his mother's manipulation and his father's wrath. They were tearing each other apart, trapped inside a prison built entirely from their own entitlement. Through the earpiece, I heard the faint rustle of fabric. Maya had retrieved her hidden phone from the bookshelf. She walked quietly out of the living room, leaving the screaming match behind her. The heavy front door clicked shut. The sound of rain tapping against a covered porch filled the audio feed. I assume you enjoyed the broadcast, Maya murmured into the receiver, her tone dripping with quiet, measured satisfaction. It was highly informative, I replied, tracing the rim of my ceramic mug. They are destroying the interior of the house. Maya noted the amusement clear in her voice. But the true tragedy has not even started. It is 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The caterers are gone. The gates are padlocked. I looked at my watch, and 200 elite guests are about to put on their tuxedos. I will see you at the venue, Maya said, disconnecting the line. I set the earpiece on the wooden table. The first wave of the reckoning had decimated their private lives. Now it was time to orchestrate their public execution. I left the quiet sanctuary of the Catskill Mountains late in the afternoon. My trusted nanny remained at the timber lodge reading bedtime stories to Leo by the warm stone hearth. I drove south, trading the tranquil pine forest for the congested, cutthroat highways of New York. I needed to be present for the final phase. An auditor does not merely flag a fraudulent account from a distance. An auditor oversees the final liquidation in person. I parked my unmarked black SUV on a dark, elevated ridge overlooking the private access road to the Glasshouse estate. The engine hummed a low, steady rhythm. The digital clock on my dashboard read 7 in the evening. Down below, the trap I built was snapping shut. The sprawling wrought iron gates of the luxury venue remained locked. Heavy steel chains wrapped around the center bars, securing the perimeter. Inside the grounds, the grand ballroom sat in total darkness. No string quartet played on the terrace. No valet attendants rushed forward to open car doors. There was just cold, silent stone and perfectly manicured hedges waiting in the dark. A procession of imported luxury vehicles began crawling down the narrow lane. A silver Bentley flashed its bright headlights, expecting the barrier to part. When the gates held firm, a bottleneck quickly formed. Sleek town cars and polished sports coupes stacked up along the gravel shoulder, their exhaust plumes rising into the crisp autumn air. The elite members of Long Island society began stepping out of their idling cars. They stood awkwardly in the rough gravel driveway. Women wearing delicate silk evening gowns clutched their designer wraps against the chill. Men in bespoke tuxedos checked their expensive watches, exchanging bewildered glances. The low, echoing whispers of the wealthy crowd drifted through the night air. Diamond earrings caught the harsh glare of the headlights. Stiletto heels sank slightly into the crushed stone. They expected red carpets, crystal flutes, and fawning staff. Instead, they found a barricade. A stretched limousine navigated through the gridlocked traffic, finally coming to a halt near the front of the line. The rear door opened. Richard stepped out first. His tuxedo fit perfectly, but his face carried the sickly pallor of a man walking toward a firing squad. Evelyn followed, draped in a floor-length sapphire gown. Her jaw was clenched so tight the muscles in her neck twitched. David trailed behind them, staring at his expensive leather shoes, a hollow ghost of the arrogant junior executive he pretended to be. Evelyn surveyed the stranded crowd. The socialites she spent decades trying to impress stared back at her with impatient, questioning eyes. The reality of the padlocked gate hit her. She marched forward, her heels crunching loudly against the gravel. She approached the iron bars, gripping the cold metal with both hands. A lone security guard stood on the other side, holding a clipboard and a heavy tactical flashlight. "Open this gate immediately," Evelyn demanded, her voice shrill, carrying over the idle hum of the car engines. "I am the host of this gala. These people are my guests. You are causing a scene." The guard did not flinch. He shined the flashlight toward the ground, maintaining a neutral, bored expression. "I cannot do that, ma'am. The property is secured for the evening. Management orders." Richard rushed forward, grabbing his wife by the arm, trying to pull her back. He wanted to minimize the public spectacle. He needed to spin a lie about a sudden plumbing emergency or a localized power failure to save face. But Evelyn shook him off. She was losing her mind, her carefully constructed persona unraveling in real time. She rattled the iron bars, the metal clanging loudly into the night. A sleek black Maybach pulled up to the edge of the crowd. The rear window rolled down. Isabella Vanguard leaned out, her blonde hair perfectly styled, wearing a shimmering silver dress. Beside her sat an older, distinguished man with silver hair and a sharp, calculating gaze. Her father, the architect of the private equity firm Richard desperately needed. The CEO of Vanguard Equities stepped out of the vehicle, surveying the chaotic scene with profound distaste. Just as Richard noticed the Vanguard patriarch, the heavy wooden doors of the main estate building swung open. Mr. Preston, the general manager of the Glasshouse estate, walked down the long, sweeping stone staircase. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, his posture impeccably straight. He approached the wrought iron gates, stopping a few feet away from the furious matriarch. Evelyn opened her mouth to scream another demand, but Mr. Preston held up a hand, silencing her with practiced authority. His voice was calm, yet projected clearly enough to ensure every single person in the driveway could hear the exact reason for the lockout. "Mrs. Frank," Mr. Preston said, his tone polite but firm. You were issued a formal notice of default at noon yesterday. You failed to satisfy the financial compliance terms of the Tier 1 liability contract you executed on Thursday. Your certified wire transfer for the guaranteed balance did not clear. We cannot open this facility without the required capital to cover the vendors and staffing. The event is officially canceled due to non-payment. The words dropped into the crowd like a live grenade. Non-payment. It was the ultimate, unforgivable sin in their high society circle. The wealthy guests gasped. The confused whispers instantly morphed into a chorus of stunned silence, followed by a wave of ruthless, judging murmurs. The elite crowd recoiled, their faces contorting with a mixture of shock and sheer disdain. They looked at the Frank family as if they were carrying a contagious disease. The facade shattered. Richard stood frozen, his eyes locked on the CEO of Vanguard Equities. The older man shook his head slowly, a look of profound disgust washing over his features. He turned his back on the Frank family, placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder, and guided her back toward the Maybach. Isabella cast one final horrified glance at David before the tinted window rolled up. The heavy car reversed, maneuvering out of the driveway, taking the commercial bridge loan bailout and Richard's entire financial future with it. Evelyn slumped against the iron gate, her knees giving out. The sapphire gown suddenly looked like a cheap costume draped over a broken woman. The matriarch, who prided herself on status, was now a public spectacle of poverty. The rest of the crowd began turning away, walking back to their vehicles, eager to distance themselves from the stench of bankruptcy. David stood paralyzed in the gravel, his hands trembling at his sides. He had lost his mistress, his inheritance, and his pride in a matter of seconds. Near the edge of the departing crowd, Maya stepped out from behind a silver sedan. She wore a stunning black evening gown, watching the implosion from the sidelines with quiet, measured satisfaction. She caught my eye through the windshield of my parked vehicle on the ridge and offered a single approving nod. I watched the destruction from above, the cold logic of the snare executing perfectly. The pressure cooker had finally blown its lid, leaving nothing but scorched earth in its wake. I shifted my vehicle into drive. My tires crunched over the asphalt as I descended the hill, steering my unmarked SUV directly toward the chaotic driveway. It was time to step out of the shadows. It was time to deliver the final audit. The headlights of my SUV cut through the cool autumn darkness, washing over the chaotic scene spilling out of the private access road. I steered the vehicle slowly down the paved incline. The remaining luxury town cars and limousines parted their drivers, pulling onto the grass shoulders to allow my approach. The stragglers of Long Island high society lingered near their idling vehicles, unwilling to leave the spectacle. They stood in their designer evening wear, whispering behind gloved hands, watching the Frank dynasty crumble against the iron gates of the Glasshouse estate. I guided the car to a halt directly behind Evelyn and Richard. I shifted the gear into park and turned off the engine. The sudden quiet inside the cabin lasted only a second. I reached over to the passenger seat and picked up a heavy leather-bound clipboard holding the finalized corporate audit report. I pushed the door open and stepped out into the night. My stiletto heels struck the polished concrete driveway. The sharp, rhythmic clicking echoed through the tense air, drawing the attention of the murmuring crowd. I wore a tailored black suit, my hair pulled back into a severe, immaculate twist. I did not look like a defeated daughter-in-law. I looked like the architect of their ruin. Evelyn turned at the sound of my approach. Her sapphire gown was wrinkled, her perfect blowout ruined by the damp evening breeze. When she saw my face, a fleeting spark of desperate hope ignited in her eyes. She still believed in the hierarchy she had invented. She still believed I was a subordinate tool meant to serve her vanity. Victoria Evelyn cried out, her voice cracking as she rushed toward me. Her heels slipped on the crushed gravel. "Thank goodness you are here. Tell this ridiculous manager to open the perimeter. Tell him about your deposit. He is refusing to let the caterers inside, and the investors are watching. Use your connections and fix this right now." I did not stop walking. I bypassed my mother-in-law entirely, stepping around her outstretched hand as if she were a discarded piece of scenery. I walked straight to the wrought iron barrier. Mr. Preston stood on the other side, holding his tactical flashlight and a two-way radio. He saw my approach and immediately straightened his posture, shifting his stance from defensive guard to professional subordinate. "Good evening, Mr. Preston," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent driveway. "Has the automated lockout protocol been fully executed?" "Yes, ma'am," Mr. Preston replied, offering a crisp nod. "The financial compliance deadline expired at noon. All auxiliary staff have been dismissed. The premises are secure. Thank you for maintaining the integrity of our risk parameters," I told him, handing the leather clipboard through the iron bars. "Here is the finalized audit report for the Frank account. Please attach it to the pending collection notice your legal department will file on Monday morning." Evelyn froze. Her desperate panting ceased. The surrounding crowd of wealthy onlookers leaned in closer, captivated by the sudden shift in the power dynamic. Richard stepped forward, his face a mask of bewildered rage. "Why is the general manager addressing you as his superior?" he demanded, his baritone voice wavering. "What collection notice are you talking about, Victoria?" I turned slowly to face my husband's family. The ambient glow from the estate security lights illuminated the terror etched into their features. Maya stood near the edge of the driveway, wrapped in her elegant black gown, watching the scene unfold with a serene, knowing gaze. "Because I am not merely a guest at this venue, Richard," I explained, keeping my tone surgical and cold. "I am the senior hospitality risk analyst for this entire regional management group. My firm audits the financial stability of every premier estate in the Hudson Valley. When a client poses a liability, I am the authority who flags their account and locks the doors." David let out a choked gasp. He stumbled backward, his leather shoes scraping against the pavement. The truth hit him with the force of a physical blow. "You canceled my anniversary gala," Evelyn shrieked, the betrayal warping her features into an ugly snarl. "You vindictive, jealous girl. You ruined this night on purpose just to humiliate us." I did not ruin anything. Evelyn and I countered, taking one step closer to her. My gaze remained perfectly steady. "I did not cancel your party. I simply stepped out of your way and let your own arrogance execute the trap. You assumed my independent wealth was community property. You hijacked this date, expecting my $25,000 deposit to cover your extravagant charade. But luxury hospitality operates on verified liquidity, not suburban entitlement." I gestured toward the locked gates behind me. "When you signed that Tier 1 liability waiver on Thursday, you legally severed my funds from this event I detailed, ensuring my voice carried to the wealthy investors lingering near their sedans. You eagerly transferred the entire financial burden onto your husband. The compliance software requires hosts in that specific risk category to provide a $150,000 damage guarantee. The system drafted your account. Your transaction failed." Richard clenched his fists, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "You set us up," he hissed, trying to salvage a shred of authority in front of his peers. "You knew my commercial bridge loans were undergoing restructuring. You knew my capital was temporarily tied up." "Your capital is not tied up, Richard. It is gone," I stated, delivering the undeniable facts with lethal precision. "Your commercial portfolio is entirely underwater. You needed this high society exhibition to trick Vanguard Equities into bailing out your toxic debt. If you actually possessed the generational wealth you flaunt at the country club, the automated draft would have cleared, and these gates would be open. You are standing in the dark right now because you are insolvent. I merely allowed the corporate software to read your true net worth." The murmurs from the crowd grew louder, a buzzing hive of gossip that would spread across Long Island by midnight. The Frank patriarch was broke. The illusion was dead. David finally found his voice. He stepped out from the shadows of a parked limousine, his eyes red and frantic. "Victoria, please," he begged, holding his hands up in a gesture of surrender. "Do not do this here. We can go home and talk about the savings account. I can explain the withdrawals. You mean the embezzlement, I corrected, smoothly turning my analytical gaze onto my husband. The crowd went dead silent again, hungry for the final piece of the scandal. David flinched, wrapping his arms around his own torso, as if trying to hold his fractured reality together. I do not need an explanation for the missing capital, David. I continued my words, striking him like stones. I already provided the forensic ledger to a family court judge. That is why your banking applications displayed a frozen asset warning this afternoon. You siphoned our joint savings to fund a secret relationship with the Vanguard heiress. Evelyn covered her mouth with her hand, a horrified sob escaping her throat. The socialites watching the exchange gasped. You purchased an $8,000 Cartier bracelet for another woman while relying on my income to sustain your lifestyle. I outlined stripping away his dignity, layer by layer. You authorized your mother to steal your own 4-year-old son's birthday venue because you lacked the courage to admit you were bankrupt. You traded your family for a status upgrade you could not afford to maintain. David dropped his gaze to the gravel tears spilling over his cheeks. The golden sun was exposed as a common thief. I did not maliciously destroy this family, I concluded, looking at the three of them standing amidst the wreckage of their reputation. I simply stopped underwriting your lies. The American corporate system is highly unforgiving to those who fake their margins. You tried to audit my worth, but you forgot that I am the one who writes the compliance protocols. I turned my back on them and walked toward my vehicle. The heavy silence of the driveway was broken only by the sharp click of my heels. Behind me, the reality of the Monday morning collection notice loomed over Richard's head, an inescapable financial reckoning. The gates were locked, the investors were gone, and the divorce papers were already sitting on my attorney's desk, ready to drop the final curtain on their hollow empire. The cold autumn wind swept across the gravel driveway, carrying the acrid scent of car exhaust and crushed pine needles. I stood beside my vehicle, watching the final act of the tragedy unfold. The high society crowd did not linger to offer sympathy or assist the fallen hosts. In the ruthless ecosystem of Long Island wealth, insolvency is treated like a fatal contagion. The onlookers retreated to their idling town cars and limousines, their designer shoes crunching rapidly against the stone. Richard frantically chased after a senior partner from a prominent Manhattan real estate coalition. The older gentleman was a crucial backer for Richard's suburban retail developments, a man whose endorsement kept the creditors at bay. Richard reached out his hand, trembling, trying to grasp the sleeve of the partner's tailored tuxedo jacket. "Do not touch me," Richard the partner snapped, pulling his arm away with visceral revulsion. "You lied to my board. You leveraged our investments on a bridge loan you could not sustain, and you brought us here to witness a lockout. Expect a call from our legal department on Monday morning. We are liquidating our positions before the market opens." Richard staggered backward as if struck by a physical blow. The remaining color drained from his face, leaving his skin an ashen gray. His firm was not merely bankrupt, it was doomed to face decades of relentless litigation. The investors were walking away, sealing the coffin on his commercial real estate empire. He stood frozen on the pavement, a deposed king stripped of his crown. Evelyn remained slumped against the wrought iron gate, her sapphire gown, once a symbol of her reigning dominance, now pooled in the dirt. Several women from her exclusive country club hospitality committee walked past her. These were the same socialites Evelyn had hosted for countless lavish brunches, women who had smiled and kissed her cheeks just days prior. Now they did not even offer a passing glance. The club president, a woman Evelyn had spent years trying to unseat, paused just long enough to cast a look of profound, chilling pity at the fallen matriarch. They kept their eyes fixed forward, wrapping their cashmere shawls tighter around their shoulders, treating Evelyn like a discarded piece of trash. The humiliation was pure poison to a woman who had worshipped status above her own family. The gridlock near the exit of the access road began to clear, but the long stretch of black pavement remained choked with departing vehicles. A few yards away, the tinted window of a sleek Maybach lowered. Isabella Vanguard's father leaned out, barking an order to his driver to maneuver onto the grass shoulder. The heavy car lurched forward, but a stalled catering van blocked the narrow lane, trapping the luxury vehicle in the mud. Isabella pushed the rear door open and stepped out into the night. She carried a small silver clutch, her posture rigid with fury. A sleek, black hired car summoned via a rideshare application pulled up along the opposite shoulder, its hazard lights blinking in the darkness. David spotted her. The sight of his mistress slipping away broke through his paralyzing shock. He stumbled across the gravel, his chest heaving, his silk tie hanging askew. "Isabella, wait," David pleaded, his voice cracking into a pathetic, reedy whine. He reached out, desperate to cling to the single remaining lifeline of his fabricated success. "Let me explain the situation. The asset freeze is just a temporary misunderstanding. I can fix this." Isabella stopped near the open door of her waiting vehicle. She turned to face the man who had bought her expensive dinners and a rose gold Cartier bracelet with stolen funds. Her expression held zero affection. There was only the cold, hard calculation of a woman who had just realized she backed a losing asset. "You are broke," David Isabella stated, her tone flat and devoid of any sympathy. "You do not even own the jewelry you bought me. My father is threatening to cut off my trust fund just for associating with a fraudulent embezzler. Do not ever contact me again." She slid into the back seat of the hired car and slammed the door shut. The tires spun on the damp pavement, kicking up a spray of loose dirt as the vehicle sped away into the night. David stood alone in the center of the road, bathed in the harsh red glow of departing taillights. The mistress had abandoned him on the spot, confirming that her loyalty was tethered only to the illusion of his wealth. He turned around, his shoulders sagging, his eyes hollow and bloodshot. He looked at his parents, broken and destitute, near the padlocked gates. Then he looked at me. He dragged his feet across the stone driveway, closing the distance between us. Tears streamed down his cheeks, cutting tracks through the pale sheen of sweat on his face. The arrogant junior executive was gone. The man standing before me was a hollow shell, stripped of the unearned pedigree that had shielded him from consequence his entire life. "Victoria, I am so sorry," David sobbed, his voice breaking into a pathetic whimper. He fell to his knees, the sharp gravel tearing into the fabric of his expensive trousers. He reached out his trembling fingers, hovering inches from the hem of my skirt, terrified to actually touch me. "Please, you have to forgive me. I was stupid. I let my mother pressure me into the Vanguard connection. I never stopped loving you. We can go to counseling. I will do whatever you want." I looked down at the man I had married. 5 years ago, I believed his polished charm signaled ambition and loyalty. The ensuing years had revealed the toxic rot beneath the veneer. He was a parasite who fed on the achievements of others, terrified of his own mediocrity. He did not regret betraying his family. He only regretted losing his safety net. I did not feel anger. I did not feel sorrow. I felt the crisp, clinical satisfaction of a closed audit. I turned toward the open door of my SUV. I reached into the center console and retrieved a thick, heavy manila envelope. The legal document inside had been finalized by my attorneys 2 days prior, waiting for the perfect moment of execution. I turned back to David. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, pathetic hope. He thought my silence signaled hesitation. He still believed he could charm his way out of the consequences. I extended my arm and dropped the envelope. The heavy packet landed with a soft thud on the gravel, right between his trembling knees. "What is this?" David whispered, staring at the brown paper as if it were a venomous serpent. "Those are the finalized dissolution papers," I explained, keeping my voice smooth and level. "My attorneys have already submitted the preliminary filings to the state court. The documents include a comprehensive forensic accounting of the $18,000 you embezzled. Per the penal code regarding marital waste, that exact sum will be deducted from your remaining half of the home equity. Furthermore, the temporary restraining order on the joint accounts is now a permanent injunction." David let out a wounded gasp, his hands shaking as he touched the edge of the envelope. "You are taking everything." He choked out the reality of his destitution crashing over him. You gave everything away, David, I corrected him. I am merely balancing the ledger. Evelyn let out a fresh wail from her spot near the gates, finally comprehending that her son was losing his marriage and his financial stability in the same breath. Richard remained silent, his gaze fixed on the dark pavement, paralyzed by the impending collapse of his own empire. I stepped around my kneeling husband and climbed into the driver's seat of my vehicle. I pulled the heavy door shut, sealing out the damp autumn wind and the sound of his weeping. I fastened my seatbelt, adjusted the rearview mirror, and shifted the gear into drive. Through the reinforced glass, I took one final look at the Frank dynasty. They were stranded in the dark driveway of a luxury estate they could not afford to enter. Their investors had abandoned them. Their prestige had evaporated. They were stripped of their wealth, their power, and their social standing, left with nothing but the toxic consequences of their own deceit. I pressed my foot against the accelerator. The tires gripped the asphalt. I drove up the access road, leaving the wreckage behind me, steering toward the quiet mountains where my son was sleeping peacefully, safe from the ruin they had designed for themselves. 6 months passed since the heavy iron gates of the Glasshouse estate locked shut. The transition from the damp, chaotic autumn night to the bright, crisp spring morning felt like stepping out of a suffocating holding cell into the open air. I stood near the doorway of my corner office, holding a warm cup of herbal tea. The space smelled of fresh linen and expensive citrus polish. A maintenance worker in a blue uniform stood on a small step stool, holding a new brass nameplate. He aligned the heavy metal rectangle against the frosted glass of my door, driving the final screw into place. He wiped the surface clean with a microfiber cloth and stepped back, giving a satisfied nod. "Thank you," I murmured, taking a slow sip of the tea. He gathered his tools and walked down the carpeted hallway. I lingered in the doorway, staring at the polished brass. It bore my maiden name, Victoria Bennett. The surname Frank was gone unscrewed and discarded into a recycling bin. Erasing his name from my professional identity was the final administrative task of a meticulously executed divorce. I walked back to my large mahogany desk and sat in the ergonomic leather chair. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the bustling New York streets. Directly across the avenue sat a sprawling, sunlit public park. I watched the tiny figures moving through the green space. I easily spotted the bright yellow jacket of my son. Leo was climbing a wooden playground structure, laughing as his nanny pushed him on a swing. He was happy, healthy, and fully shielded from the toxic wreckage of his father's lineage. Securing full custody did not require a grueling, drawn-out legal battle. The fight ended before it even began. When the judicial asset freeze became permanent, David found himself wholly devoid of resources. He could not hire a premium litigation attorney to contest the divorce terms. The forensic audit I provided to the court proved his embezzlement beyond a shadow of a doubt. The judge viewed his diversion of marital assets to a mistress as a profound breach of fiduciary duty. During the preliminary mediation session, David sat across a wide conference table, his face pale and sunken. He looked like a hollow shell. He capitulated almost immediately, signing the dissolution papers with shaking hands, agreeing to supervised visitation, and surrendering his claim to our primary residence. He currently resided in a cramped, dark studio apartment on the outskirts of Queens. The junior executive who once bragged about his cryptocurrency portfolio now worked a mid-level data entry job, reporting to managers a decade younger than him. His modest salary barely covered his monthly rent and his court-mandated child support payments. The Vanguard heiress was a distant, humiliating memory. Isabella blocked his phone number the exact night of the lockout and never looked back. David was trapped in the ordinary, mundane existence he had spent his life mocking. A soft knock on my office door broke my train of thought. Maya walked in, carrying 2 crisp paper bags from an exclusive downtown bistro. She wore a stunning ivory suit, looking radiant and unbothered by the shifting tides of her extended family. She set the bags onto the small glass coffee table near the leather visitor sofa. "I brought the roasted pear salads you like," Maya announced, taking a seat and crossing her slender legs. I left my desk and joined her on the sofa, grateful for the quiet camaraderie we shared. The bond between us had galvanized over the past 6 months. We were allies who had survived a collapsing empire, navigating the debris with synchronized precision. "How are things on Long Island?" I asked, opening the paper bag and retrieving the pristine white takeout boxes. "Quiet," Maya replied, a dark amusement dancing in her eyes. The kind of quiet that follows a very expensive funeral. The bankruptcy auction for the estate concluded yesterday. The creditors seized the primary manor, the imported luxury vehicles, and the remaining commercial properties. They even cataloged Richard's vintage wine collection and Evelyn's antique Persian rugs. Richard and Evelyn were forced to vacate the premises by noon today. The image of my former mother-in-law packing her designer gowns into cheap cardboard boxes flashed through my mind, a stark contrast to the performative glamour she once wielded like a weapon. "Where are they living?" I inquired, piercing a piece of roasted pear with my wooden fork. "Thomas moved them into a modest 2-bedroom condominium near the regional airport," Maya stated, her tone holding zero sympathy for their plight. "I drafted the lease agreement myself, ensuring the deed remains strictly under my corporate holding trust. They do not own a single square foot of the property. They are tenants in our world now." The reversal of fortune was incredibly poetic. The patriarch who projected an illusion of infinite generational wealth was now a dependent, stripped of his business ventures and his overbearing pride. "And Evelyn?" I asked. "She tried to attend the spring charity luncheon at the country club last Tuesday," Maya recounted, taking a bite of her salad. "Her membership was revoked months ago due to the unpaid dues, but she believed her legacy status would grant her entry. The club president instructed the security guards to escort her off the premises. She had to walk back to a standard rental sedan while the entire planning committee watched from the terrace. She has not left the condominium since that afternoon." The social exile was final. The elite peers Evelyn desperately tried to impress had discarded her the moment the financial facade shattered. She traded her dignity for a status upgrade, only to find herself permanently locked out of the very society she worshipped. The profound tragedy of her existence was that she now possessed nothing else to fall back on. She had alienated her family, ruined her youngest son, and bankrupted her husband, all for a fleeting display of vanity. We ate our lunch in comfortable silence, watching the afternoon sun filter through the glass walls of the corporate building. Maya eventually checked her designer watch, gathered her belongings, and stood up to leave. "Thomas is adjusting," Maya noted near the doorway, offering a soft, genuine smile. It took him a while to accept the harsh reality of his parents' deceit, but the physical and financial distance has been good for him. "We are focusing solely on our own children now." "That is all we can do," I agreed. "Protect the baseline." "I will see you next week, Victoria." I watched her walk away, the new brass nameplate catching the light as the heavy door clicked shut. I returned to my desk, feeling an immense, grounding peace. The anxiety that used to tightly coil in my stomach during my marriage was gone. I no longer walked on eggshells. I no longer compromised my boundaries to appease entitled people who viewed my success as a threat. I had excised the rot and preserved the strong foundation beneath it. The quiet hum of the office was suddenly interrupted by the sharp ringing of my desk phone. The digital display indicated an incoming call forwarded from the regional hospitality switchboard. I pressed the speaker button. "Victoria Bennett speaking," I answered, my voice steady and professional. A shrill, frantic voice echoed through the speaker. It belonged to a prominent high society matron, a woman known for throwing lavish, demanding events across the Hudson Valley. "Victoria, this is Mrs. Kensington," the woman demanded, skipping any standard pleasantries. "I am attempting to book the grand ballroom at the Botanical Estate for my upcoming charity gala. Your compliance software is flagging my account and demanding a 50% cash deposit up front. This must be a clerical error. I have been a patron of that venue for a decade. I need you to bypass this ridiculous risk protocol immediately." I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair. I looked out the tall window. Down below, in the sunlit park, Leo was running across the green grass chasing a stray soccer ball with pure joy. The world felt incredibly bright, vast, and securely under my control. I brought my attention back to the glowing phone console. The matron on the other end of the line was waiting for a frantic apology. She expected the auditor to cower, override the system, and submit to her social authority. She believed her status exempted her from the rules. I placed my finger over the red disconnect button. "Mrs. Kensington," I said, maintaining a polite, glacial calm, "the compliance matrix is not an error. The venue requires the upfront capital to secure the reservation." "Do you know who my husband is?" she shrieked, the entitlement peaking into outrage. "I will not be treated like a common liability. I demand you lift the hold right now." I smiled. The expression did not reach my eyes. "I cannot do that, ma'am," I replied, my tone leaving zero room for negotiation. "The protocol is mandatory. If you cannot provide the required liquidity, I suggest you seek a smaller venue. Have a wonderful afternoon." I pressed the button. The line went dead. The frantic demands were silenced, replaced by a quiet, enduring peace. I turned back to my computer screen, reviewed the next luxury audit file, and began to work. The quiet woman had finally secured the last word. We live in a culture that frequently confuses the price tag with the value. In the relentless pursuit of the modern American dream, particularly within the affluent enclaves of our society, the definition of a successful family has somehow mutated. We see it in the manicured lawns, the elite private school admissions, and the extravagant milestone celebrations engineered for public consumption. But beneath this glittering veneer, a profound spiritual poverty often takes root. From the perspective of one who observes the world through the lens of inner cultivation, seeking wisdom, morality, and resilience, the collapse of the Frank family is not merely a tale of financial ruin. It is a devastating mirror held up to the tragic consequences of superficial parenting, and a masterclass in the quiet, enduring power of self-correction. What message does this narrative offer to American parents? It serves as a stark, urgent warning about the architecture of the souls we are building in our children. Richard and Evelyn Frank believed they were providing their son with the ultimate advantage by wrapping him in a cocoon of unearned prestige. They shielded him from accountability, smoothed over his failures with money, and taught him that social status could overwrite personal character. In doing so, they stripped him of his fundamental resilience, his knee look. They raised a coward who shrank in the face of adversity, a man who embezzled from his own wife to fund an illusion simply because he was never taught the quiet dignity of honest struggle. When parents prioritize the performative over the profound, when they worship at the altar of societal approval rather than cultivating an environment of emotional safety and fairness, they are not raising leaders, they are raising fragile actors. Terrified of the moment the stage lights inevitably go out. True traditional family education is rooted in a distinctly different soil. It is built on the unwavering pillars of honesty, emotional awareness, and moral integrity, Dauduk. It is about teaching a child that their worth is not determined by the name on their country club membership, but by the strength of their character when no one is watching. Victoria's choice to pull her son out of that toxic, high society crossfire to celebrate his 4th birthday in the quiet sanctuary of the woods is the ultimate display of genuine family responsibility. She replaced cold, performative extravagance with warmth, presence, and pure joy. She understood that a child does not need a grand ballroom to feel loved. They need a safe harbor. They need parents who possess the emotional awareness to break generational curses rather than pass them down like inherited silver. For the young men and women navigating this highly competitive, status-driven society, the protagonist's journey offers a profound blueprint for survival and self-mastery. The message to the younger generation is unequivocal. Do not trade your moral compass for a seat at a toxic table. In a world that constantly demands you compromise your values to fit into broken systems, true power lies in the cultivation of your own independent intellect and emotional stillness, your tritwe. Victoria did not survive her in-laws by matching their hysteria or adopting their cruel methods. She survived through absolute clarity and self-discipline. As a spiritual observer might note, she practiced the highest form of detachment. She did not throw stones at the glass house. She merely stepped aside and allowed the heavy weight of their own arrogance to shatter the foundation. Young people must understand that you do not need to scream to be heard, nor do you need to actively destroy those who wrong you. You must only cultivate yourself, build your skills, guard your financial and emotional independence, and maintain a quiet, steadfast grip on reality. When you possess genuine substance, the illusions of others lose their power to harm you. This story reflects the deeper reality of human suffering. So much of the pain we experience in our modern lives stems from our desperate attachment to the false idols of prestige and societal validation. We exhaust ourselves trying to prove our worth to people who measure value entirely by external metrics. The spiritual path, the path of self-correction and inner cultivation, demands that we turn our gaze inward. It asks us to refine our own character, to develop the wisdom to see through the shallow games of status, and to find the moral courage to walk away from them. When we focus on repairing ourselves rather than fighting the brokenness of others, we elevate our lives. We find the enduring peace that the Frank family spent millions trying to fake. If this journey of quiet resilience resonates with the battles you fight in your own life, I invite you to join our community of quiet survivors. Subscribe to Morning Revenge, where we continue to explore the profound strength found in stepping away from the noise and reclaiming your peace. As we reflect on the ruins of the Frank dynasty and the quiet mountains where Victoria found her sanctuary, we must confront a deeply uncomfortable truth about family forgiveness and American culture. We are constantly fed the narrative that family is an unbreakable bond, that blood requires endless patience, and that true moral high ground is found in relentless reconciliation and compromise. We are conditioned to keep the gate open, to turn the other cheek, and to sacrifice our own boundaries for the sake of maintaining the traditional family unit. But perhaps that is the ultimate cultural illusion, the profound philosophical truth, the one that goes against every conventional platitude we sew onto pillows and print on greeting cards, is that sometimes the highest manifestation of love is absolute exclusion. Sometimes protecting the innocent requires you to become the unflinching architect of a locked door. Peace is not always found in the exhausting, endless labor of healing a toxic relationship. True peace is often found in the cold, precise, and permanent amputation of the disease. We owe our children a safe world, not a compromised one. And occasionally, the most enlightened spiritual action a parent can take is not to build a bridge, but to burn it to the ground, ensuring the fire lights the way to a much better life.